understand, I mean, people are, no one wants to get it, it's terrible,
Like locked down in school and
but,
then they were reading.
no, yeah, I mean, it's a,
There was some email.
I was like, you wanna teach elementary?
They sent.
I'm hungry. What
That's a good point,
Yeah.
coming for you.
There's little kids with
Yeah.
germs, that's just.
No,
But wouldn't the immune system usually develop, like,
we are live on
And I
YouTube.
still. Don't know what to say all the time.
Two people watching. I don't hear yours as well.
That I checked my church's website, that's traffic, like, wow, we got 25 visitors, like, it's probably, half of those are probably me, just
Checking to see if.
checking to see if it's going. Probably. Or we had a big spike in Chinese traffic for some week, like just random servers from China, it's like. I didn't know we had quite that reach, you know, getting. New work I helped, like, cause I was like really excited, cause it's like, wow, cause I didn't look at where it was coming, I said, wow, it just spiked. Like triple their numbers, international congregation, yeah. And it's like, I gotta go read all the things that's going on, yeah, it's probably. Bots. You know, some of them, it's like. Yeah, very made back.
Thank you. Would you like access to that?
Yeah, awesome for all one. That'd be a little easier. Sarah's on. Yeah.
I am.
Ah, good.
I will say, I think that Kate has the best strategy in terms of like letting someone know when the slide needs to change, because she just works it into her narrative and she says, on the next slide, you will see. And it's just, it's wonderful because it's not like a non sequitur in terms of saying next slide, right? Just, she's very, very polished.
In the next chapter.
I'm impressed.
The next chapter.
Yeah.
I'll see what I can do, Matt.
I'll try to have a high bar to hit there, Sarah. Right, so anyone that is online virtually, we are gonna start up probably in about 5 minutes or so. We appreciate you being punctual and on time. We just usually like to give a little bit of time for people to trickle in, whether we're in person here or those that are joining us virtually. So just hang tight and we will get going shortly here.
Hi, Matt. Just double checking that there's a sign-in sheet in the room.
Thank you, Sawala.
There's not.
There it is. It's just tucked in my backpack. So
Okay, perfect.
I appreciate the assist there, Sawala.
No problem.
Where? Let me pump out of it.
Trying to think if there's. Yeah, there are classes back there.
This
No,
class
it's
is
the,
there. This side of me,
That's the course.
is that part of them?
and the courtyard should be over
Oh, they
there,
are showing it.
but I'm not sure if there's,
I don't think
there's never been windows in here since I've been here. even before they reach.
No, I think there is something over there, because if you go out the hall, there's offices over
That's the
there,
nurse's office.
They're here,
the bathroom's there.
nurses are on the other
I
side.
But
really
isn't-
want to.
isn't
go
like,
to my
That
bathroom.
one,
I
is
did not-
Pfizer's office are there. And then there's the,
Pfizer's like right there.
Uh-huh. and then there's the overpass, and then the nurse is on the other side of the overpass next to the. Except, or the nurse is on the second floor, not the third floor, but, by the cat.
Classrooms, I think, are at the college.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
The idea is, once you know the building, it's really not that bad. The worst part about this building, quite honestly, I mean, for people getting around, is when you come for any sort of sporting events,
Uh-huh.
trying to get to the back of the building or know where.
Find
or which
To get
side-
to the,
Yeah.
because I'm gonna park by the pool now, and people coming for basketball games are, where's the gym? I'm like, oh, go in the pool, and then I realize, once they get in, like,
It doesn't
there's no
say
sign
where to
that
go,
says where
no,
to
it says,
and these people are so confused.
one, it's always dark and like, so I'll be like, okay, go this way or like, nowhere else.
Well, when you come to the pool during the day, and you can't go in the pool entrance, you have to go around the back of the.
The
gym
back,
Oh my god.
yeah.
Alright,
To the other pool.
I was gonna say,
We
I
just-
know that, but
we just keep propping the gym doors to get in the back now for games.
Yes,
It's-
we appreciate that.
yeah, I was gonna say, and then they go around and unprop it.
Well,
and then re-prop it.
okay, to be clear, by we, I mean my coach, I have not done anything, please don't be mad at me.
Oh, I laugh every time Cam walks around and I'm like, Cam, really? Someone's gonna do it there, they.
Well, we got that, I get that, spoken to. And then it started getting rough again, and I didn't know, it was okay.
It
or
helps,
someone-
they also prop it when it's hot out in there.
Oh, yeah, but
Which is,
Well, what, it's 50% hot and the other 50% is
I was
freezing?
frigid the other day, I was wearing a coat inside for a game.
Well, I will happily admit that full of everything. I have the 2 electric space heaters in my classroom that I put on my desk constantly, and I don't know how that could be a safety.
Nope, that's not safe.
Listen.
Oh, it's on your desk, near their paper problems.
No, I have one here and one here, really not, on either side, but I'm not the only teacher, and it's like the principal has a space heater, like another teacher has like 3 people blowing the fuses, so then they've shown us how to flip the fuses.
Huh.
Well, this building.
I know.
Okay. This is person. So which one are you? Okay. Alright, we all overlap there.
That being said, I feel like I'm so used to it at this point that.
Well, I've gotten smart, that's it.
Just so you know, I look at it, be like, well, like, trying to against the park in the.
No worries.
So every travel basketball game, I'm like, I'm sorry.
And so that says gym,
No.
right? There's
I
not
mean,
more.
there is a gym entrance, it just doesn't seem, it's like pretty nice, well, it probably was at some point, but
But it says there's a community school.
yes,
Pool, none of them actually say gym.
no. Yeah, I'm just.
Who thought that was a good thing?
I
I mean, no, you, but like,
I've been here for 4.5 months, I have a long list of who thought that was a good idea.
oh, you want to know mine?
I mean, it's like, here's it,
I'm sure yours is probably long.
it's just hidden and then you just get the thing. Alright, what's mine?
Just trying to find a spot that's not gonna be on the computer, so I don't. It's not gonna get to me right. Okay,
Yeah, no worries.
don't let me leave without giving it.
I will, but if I don't get it, I'll get it.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Has somebody, I know you guys have had people come around and do surveys of everything. Has anybody watched the traffic flows in the morning and afternoon? They have,
Yes, yep.
like,
It's still working, I think.
I've just never seen anyone standing outside my classroom in the
I think
afternoon.
they stand down by the corner.
So can I suggest that somebody stands where the parents start honking at each other around 2:15 up in the back, like by the community school's entrance? They just,
Oh, have that?
they're honking at
Mhm.
each other.
Really?
Ah.
I believe you.
Yes, I took. I took
Yeah, I
a
think
picture the other day, 'cause I
they
was
were
like,
down at Steve Miller Drive, and then they watched in different spots around the front, like watching, counting what goes up the loop and comes around the other way.
this is what they do, and they park and they pull over and they honk at each other. Just
Good language.
for reference, at the back corner of the building. You can't, and they just,
Yeah, because they're all away from the curb.
but then sometimes there are people parked over there and then the buses can't turn and they're thinking each other, they feel like two rows. I'm just letting you, making sure somebody knows that it's,
Oh, it's hot.
I mean, what, but I know, I wasn't sure if they were like, I was like, I think they're just at the front of the building and that's where the parents want to sit.
Sign sheet that I really put all the way over there.
All right. So we took a brief foray into our site and safety and security
Overstepping our.
advisory team, which is okay. Because that's what we'll go over really quickly. There's a lot of overlap between these, but we are going to get going with our exterior interior design advisory team meeting number 2. If I can get the slides to wake up, we'll move forward. We'll do a quick round of introductions of the design team, again, just so you know who is talking primarily, but we're still gonna have a lot of opportunity for dialogue as we go forward. I will do, as I've done at the other second iteration of these meetings, just give an opportunity, if there's anyone new that was not able to introduce themselves at the first meeting from the Medford team, I'm happy to allow a couple minutes just to allow people to tell us about themselves and sort of their connection to the project. We're going to do a quick recap in terms of what we went over in terms of meeting 1 as part of this discussion. We're going to talk a little bit about the context of civic architecture that is here within the city and what that means for this project moving forward. We're going to talk about how we formulate and think about exterior materials moving forward at a very high level. We're not getting too specific just yet. And similarly, we're going to talk a little bit about interior design and materiality for the interior of the building. And then lastly, talk about the concept of experiential graphic design and how that can help connect to and reinforce the culture of the building. And then we'll wrap up just going over some next steps. All right, so just a real introduction very quickly. Again, my name is Matt Rice. I'm an architect with SMMA. And we'll go in the room here. We have one other.
All right, Michael Pardek. I'm also an architect, project designer.
And online, I think Helen is may join us in a couple minutes. She is our project manager. I know we have Sarah online.
Hi, everybody. Sarah Long, interior design with SMMA.
And I think we have Soala as well.
Hi everyone, good to see you all again. It's Soala, architectural designer at SMMA.
And Matt, I'm here as well. Lucas Carrier, designer at SMMA.
Great. Is there anyone else that I missed from the design team? And just, I'll give an opportunity. Do we have folks from left field? Jenna?
Yes, Jen Carlson here. And Matt Galino will be joining us shortly. I am the project director with Left Field, the owner's project manager. And Matt Galino, who will be joining us shortly, is the day-to-day project manager.
Great. Thank you. All right, and then this is our Medford advisory team members. Again, is there anyone on the line that is a new member that didn't get a chance to introduce, not a new member, but was on this list, but wasn't able to make the first meeting, that wants to just do a quick introduction? All right, I'm going to keep moving, taking that as a no. We're just giving this quick reminder, probably at every meeting as we go forward, and as this evolves and gets updated as we move forward, we'll change this. But for the time being, this is still our schedule as it's laid out currently. A fall opening of 2030 is our goalpost that we're moving towards. The starred touch points that we have here for the advisory team meetings, and this is every one of the 4 meetings are going to happen at each one of these start points. The second meeting where we are now is still in this first portion of the feasibility study where we are. The next meeting that we're going to have, number 3, actually is going to happen towards the beginning of March. We'll give the specific time and date towards the end of the meeting, but this is going to be the final meeting that we have in this portion of the feasibility study, not the final meeting overall. And then just a reminder that this exterior and interior design advisory team meeting is part of a collection of these 4 groups that I'll just keep saying it over and over again, that these are not siloed activities or discussions that we're having. There is a lot of overlap that happens. We do want to focus in on these topics to have some conversations so that we can understand what the community is thinking and sort of where the community's priorities and goals are moving forward. We'll bring those together, and these will all come back to the full building committee as recommendations coming out of this process, the series of meetings that we're in right now. All right, I think there's an animation on the slide. This is a slide that we have reviewed a couple of times. We reviewed it last night with the full building committee. We're sharing it again here just because it's pertinent in terms of the topic of design when we start thinking about what the building may look like on the outside and the inside, to understand how we're progressing along. What we shared with the building committee last night was repeated over and over again. That was not design options, but really high level cost alternatives. Eventually, though, those will evolve into design concepts. And it's really going to be part of what we talk about here as we move forward in terms of getting some input and feedback. We're going to get input and feedback from a lot of different sources and voices as we go through the process. But this is one that will have some specific conversations as we get to sort of that next level of having sort of moving things from those cost models into actual design options. And again, if you did not catch the meeting last night, we did have 29 different high-level cost models that are being put out into the world for cost estimating. We reviewed with the building committee last night. It really confirmed that this is a correct number that we wanted to look at. These are really discrete cost approaches in terms of how we are either building new construction, doing partial addition and renovation of the existing building, or all the way on the left-hand side, just doing a baseline code upgrade. So we're not going to revisit the entirety of that meeting from last night. That's not the point of this discussion today. We just wanted to share the fact that these are out there. We can certainly circle back if people are curious about any aspects of these as it pertains to the subject matter of this particular advisory team. But there is some connection between what we talked about last night and what we're going to discuss here. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
All right, so it's always good to try to remember what we talked about last time. There's been a lot of meetings between then and now. So I think it's important to try to recap. We collected all of the information provided, some really good notes, and then we tried to synthesize that down to a few, collect those under some themes. It's always very helpful to take the range of things that we talked about, from what color should the brick be to who are we as a school, right? And everything in between. So word clouds are helpful. But just the first one that we heard a few times was to do more with less. That we should be looking at timeless design, timeless materials over trendy things that are maybe flashes in the pan, and that we should embrace simplicity, strains, make choices that are beautiful, materials that are beautiful and look good and exude a certain comfort, excitement, people using the building. And on the flip side, looking at life cycle costs, looking at things like maintenance, which plays into the long-term value of that material, and keeping it looking good, not beat up. So a couple people that were fond of this building, the concrete that is all around us, and its honesty and longevity. And this last phrase really stuck out to us, is that every material should earn its place in this building. That we're not here to decorate things with things that don't have purpose. Second second kind of broad bucket was materials, material health, sustainability. Many people mentioned, going after red list free materials, materials that are low in toxicity, the PVC vinyls for the project. Stating that occupant well-being, health is paramount. That's both the physical and the emotional side of that. Again, maintenance will be a big theme, especially as we get way down the road. We are selecting materials for classrooms, for hallways, for things like this with movable furniture. You know, it all gets down to that level of detail of how well that material holds up over time. You know, and avoiding things like waxing floors and working with the custodial staff to understand how the building is cared for over time. And then sustainability has always been a very high priority for this district, for this school. So that goes without saying. For investigating all those scenarios for, is it LEED, is it passive house, is it living building challenge? That'll all get discussed as we start creating buildings and sites. Next big theme here was about the civic role of the building. A lot of it was about what we were just kind of briefly talking about before, is, you know, the clarity and the site circulation. Do people intuitively know where to go, or they get lost the moment they make a right turn onto the site? Some thought that Medford as a city lacks public space, saw school, the flagship, as, you know, a great opportunity to help fill that gap. Of course, there are a lot of amazing programs here that draw people in, whether it's the pool or the fields. When there's a new auditorium and performing arts portion of the project, that's not hidden, but it's very much part of the public realm, celebrated. And that these civic spaces, I like this word, beacons in time of crisis. Might talk about times of crisis a little bit later on when I talk about kind of the civic architecture and its response to. Another theme was flexibility of the space and student ownership. So I think that flexibility goes both ways, both long-term flexibility. You know, the educational model today may not be the educational model in 40 years, 50 years. So creating spaces that can evolve over time, creating systems as well that can evolve over time. And then the other flexibility comment was more about the day-to-day use, or the class use of, you know, when class of 2026 starts inhabiting this building, how do they make it theirs for their duration here? And so you can imagine the waves of students and cohorts coming through this school, and how can we create environments that allow them to have some sense of ownership. There's a lot of that as you walk the halls here today. There's a lot of murals and things like that are either painted on a wall or in a display case. There's artifacts from probably the old school that have found a home here. Sarah will talk about how to incorporate some of that stuff a little bit later on. This one is pretty obvious, but you have an amazing site, amazing setting within the Fells. So seeing that is not just an afterthought, but how you really take advantage of the Fells throughout the season. It's always changing to the season, and there is a few really amazing views of the skyline from higher up the site. Those are important when it comes time to even thinking about where we're positioning big blocks of space within a building or which direction classrooms face. So that'll all come to play as we're starting to scope space and form and looking for ways to. This says rooftop access, but it could be rooftop, it could be on-site access for teaching spaces, for science, for events, for CTE yards that become less of a storage place and more of a showcase that the public can interact with. And there's a few other landscape architecture related things, some about the durability of the landscape. You know, we have 1,300 students plus teachers, public moving through the school and grounds. So creating that in a way that is both beautiful and durable and able to be upkept. That's always a critical conversation to have. Not to mention things like stormwater management don't really happen today. And of course, there's a few historical, there's somewhere on our site, there's a quarry or a landfill, depending on which lens you wanna see that through. And then probably the overarching thing here is, I think, belonging and creating a place that exudes school pride, whether that be from the architecture itself, whether that be from how the Mustang identity is woven, not in a like just put the logo everywhere, but you know, are the ways that weave it through the architecture, through the interiors, the way that's beautiful, thoughtful, and creative. That all these things coming together, the materials we select, the graphics, the things that the students are able to create, not just on day one, but for the life of the building. That they're able to be displayed thoughtfully throughout the building. So we thought about this and tried to sum all that up of what we thought we heard, tried to kind of challenge ourselves to get it to a concise statement. And, you know, for us, we've talked a lot about the range from materials to feelings and what things evoke, but, you know, at the heart of all this, I think what we heard is this deep sense of trying to create a place where students belong, where families belong, where people that don't have kids who are citizens of Medford feel like they belong, and visitors, you know, from other school districts, when they come to the fields, when they come to plays and things like that, that they belong with as well. So that's at the purpose and belonging at heart. And so how do we achieve that? Achieve that through selecting materials with purpose, value, through trying to achieve this timeless identity, through creating spaces that are flexible and future ready, and underpinning it all as a healthy space full of sustainability that's not just tacked on, but really woven into the fabric of the school. And then on this outer ring, these are all the things that, you know, maybe you thought when you joined this committee, you'd be talking about the color of metal panel and things like that. So those are all this outer ring, from the materials and the aesthetics of the building, the wayfinding artwork, to how people find their way around the site for athletics, after hours events, how the landscape feels and interacts with the building and the greater site, and daylight views and comfort. So that's kind of this outer ring. So we tried to kind of echo what we thought we heard in the first meeting, put it in a form that gave it a little bit of structure. Definitely had a major kind of why at the center of it all.
And I sort of neglected as we jumped into the introduction and sort of the agenda. Generally, the format for these second meetings is that we're going through in sort of groups or chapters of the discussion. take about like 10 minutes with each one of these. And have a little bit of presentation of content and then also have some feedback, discussion or thoughts associated with it. So for this first one, this was really just trying to get a sense of whether or not what we're sharing back to you resonates, right? Does it seem like we've heard the feedback that came to us during this first meeting? Are there things that you're thinking about that you mentioned last time that maybe aren't reflected here that could be, or are there some other thoughts that have sort of come out of this that you think might be interesting to add to the conversation? So we'll just take a couple minutes and field some thoughts there, and then we'll move on to the next sort of chapter. And if it's completely accurate and good, which we might just take the silence for, we will use the time in the other chapters as we move forward. That's fine as well.
The 3 rings is a nice way to organize it. I think you captured the categories. You can categorize them well.
Yeah, it's hard to, like, when you're talking about design, right, you know, it's just hard to like have a formula, but I think just doing it, this is kind of like how Simon Sinek might do it, right? There's the why in the middle, and then you have the how, the what around. It just felt like, you know, with the amount of things that we heard, that there was maybe a simple way to help frame it. And then to be able to go back to this, you know, when we're in more heated, you know, maybe in the future when we're in more heated discussions about why we're doing certain things or why we're selecting certain things, we might use this as kind of our start.
I think, I mean, I want to echo what Libby said, because I think the visual of this captures things really nicely, having been, like Marta and I have been in every single session that we've done between visioning and leadership and forum. And I think that really reflects what we've heard from teachers, from staff, from students. I said in one of the several meetings that we've been in that the most impactful part for me so far was during the educational forum work and listening to students. And they talked about the kinds of spaces where they felt the most connection or sense of belonging. So, and we did hear from teachers who it's a shift to have some shared spaces, and what will, you know, really help them be able to, you know, have a space where they can do their planning and they're collaborating with colleagues. And this really does reflect all of those conversations we've been a part of, so.
All right. Okay. Now we're gonna do a little, like a class here, but we're gonna talk about materials, no, civic architecture, and a little bit, Matt will talk about materials afterwards. But kind of on the material front, I thought we'd go way back in Medford history to talk about some of the first materials that that really meant something, and those were shipbuilding and brick making, which was kind of the mid 16 to 1700s. But I thought I'd start here instead of just jumping right into looking at some of the civic buildings to say that, you know, there is a long history here. And we know some of these, both of these industries are kind of died out in 17 and 1800s, but it's still important to recognize the history. And I think there's a really good tie to, I was thinking earlier about our CTE spaces here, like that hands-on, like it was happening here even back then, you know, because we had the skill and the material, right? We had wood, skill to build ships. We had the river to be able to send them on their way. Same with brick making. There's a lot of clay and natural materials that resourceful people turned into an industry. So I thought that was a kind of an interesting place to start. And then it's going to roll through just some civic buildings And these are kind of civic buildings by era almost. I just pulled out, you know, a handful of the ones that were mentioned last time, and some new ones, and some that I drove by on the way up here, which is kind of cool. The first one is the Marine 1891 building. I thought this was a really good place to start, because this one, you think about buildings and how they're forming their material linkage. If you think about an armory, you think, right, I'm a tough building, right? I'm holding a lot of important things historically. You know, they were used to hold ammunitions and things like that. Over time, they evolved into more community spaces in some cities. But you can see with this Romanesque revival, the stone is really rustic. It's got these castle-like turrets. So it's really trying its hardest to exude kind of strength and dominance over anybody that may walk by. That's 1891. Down in the square, the Bigelow block is late 1800s. That's a kind of a late Victorian Queen Anne style. That's kind of characterized, can't really see in the photo, but the brickwork is really ornate. There's a lot of detail. It's very intricate. A lot of these buildings express their verticality. You see it all the way up through the chimney-like elements in this corner turret on the corner, which is clad in copper. That's pretty typical of any Victorian or Anne style. It's just trying to stretch out that monumentality, but also giving the people inside, especially that corner room, kind of the visibility of the intersections where below.
Perfect spot for a Duncan.
Yeah,
I was, right?
yeah, and adaptable, right? Right. Adaptable.
So hard to find, yeah.
Yeah. Just up the street, the theater. This was 1939. It's part of the old high school building. It's a Greek revival. And I thought what was interesting about this is this building and the city hall, which I'll show next, were all part of built during the later part of the Depression. And when you think about what buildings are reacting to, I don't think that was a really great optimistic time. So in times of crisis, especially back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, architects and designers were going after these revivals. So you'll see this is a Greek revival, the city hall is a colonial revival. They're trying to call back to a previous time. A lot of it's nostalgia, like, oh, it was so great back then, like, let's recall that. So you'll see a lot of this, especially in these New Deal era buildings. Of course, being a theater, recalling Greek is not a bad place to start with kind of the classic Greek theaters that we see all the time. And Greece also being the cradle of democracy doesn't hurt, you know, when your country is very recall those sentiments. City Hall as well, not that old, 1937 building. It's like I said, it's another one of these revivals that's calling back to a more patriotic time, perhaps. So that's the story here. It's got kind of symmetry. It's got a very tall element in the middle, so that you can see it from around. But again, it's calling back. Again, this was at the very end of the Depression, so. Probably built, both of these buildings probably built with a lot of local labor. I forget which one of the New Deal outfit soups. It's either the WPA or the EWA agencies that were going through the country building these buildings. We're going to fast forward a little bit, just to keep everybody on their toes here. But, Medford Police Station, I call this like, temporary civic structure. But it definitely shows it's a kind of a serious building. It shows its utility. And it's branded. It's branded both with very large signs and this not so subtle blue glazed brick. So police stations really have a tough balance between kind of exuding protection, but they're also becoming places that are welcoming people in. The interior is actually pretty good. There's some public spaces in there that have some wood and welcoming, but from this angle, at least, it feels like it's protecting itself. With these arms that are forming the ramps, but it feels like it's kind of holding onto itself. Well, probably the architect said, well, we'll make the corner all glass, but still feels a little opaque. And then the library is probably, I don't know, one of the nicer examples of a civic building. Just opened a few years back. It ties into the first slide. You could definitely see a connection with the form of the building. Squint your eyes, you can almost imagine one of the clipper ships. I'm sure that these roof forms were inspired by shipbuilding and industries like that. And a really good example of a not so obvious here, but this is maybe one of the first net zero libraries the state, perhaps. But if you look from the aerial view, the whole rooftop was covered with photovoltaic panels, so they did a really good job here. It's really welcoming spot, city. Kind of a interesting dichotomy of two civic buildings and what they're doing. Now getting to the high school, these are, well, some of these pictures are of the high school, but the 1970s were, early 70s, late 60s were a really interesting time. I just, while researching this project, was looking who designed this building. Somebody, must have designed it, but I opened up a couple of these like 1970 architecture magazines. This is all you see for the most part.
We're told it was a guy that designed prisons.
Perhaps.
So many high schools.
So,
Thankfully, the river.
this late modernist style is, almost a brutal architecture, which is, raw concrete, single pane glass. It was used for schools, it was used for funeral homes,
No
for
color.
offices, banks, name it, laboratories. It was like the style of the day. So it's not anything, crazy. In fact, I think Salem High School, which is also going through this same process, it's also of that same era, 70s. It kind of looks very similar. But there was a really good spread in the yearbook from 1970 of this little photo essay that was put together. But I'll kind of read through some of these lines. It said, as the natural terrain was reshaped by dirt, concrete, earth-moving machines, a man-made beauty evolved that rivaled its own natural order.
Well, your beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
A world of coherence and order that even nature can be was excitedly emerging. Surely brick and mortar would not live and breathe. I mentioned, I mentioned architecture responding to what's going on. This is like Vietnam era, there's a lot of craziness going on. So a building, and the previous building had the fire, so a lot of chaos, right, going on during this time. So probably the school building committee at that time, the architects, a search for order and clarity is certainly what they did here. From the way the corridors are laid out, to the way the buildings are nicely placed together, pretty regular courtyards, and even getting down to the kind of the system of the facade, right? There's definitely rules that were applied. Whether it be how we treat stairs, how we treat windows, how we treat sunshades. Everything was orderly and in control. This quote by Marcus Aurelius, I think basically says that, you know, I think Churchill's got a similar quote, but you know, we shape our buildings and our buildings shape us. So that's kind of what we're embarking on, is the environments we create, materials we select, all have impact on the occupants, how they grow and how they learn, and how they connect with each other. So now is a good maybe moment to pause. Just kind of threw out this question. I've seen some of the civic places. You know, is there a connection between those places and this place? Is there not a connection? What does it mean to be a civic building today?
And this building does have as much significance as City Hall, as a public library. It is the flagship school for the school district. It is so much more than just the high school as well, that it does have this type of prominence. So it doesn't necessarily need to have any particular aesthetic connection, but it's definitely worth talking that through to understand, are there thoughts, are there feelings out there as to how it may connect or how it may not.
It seems out of place, other than the police station.
Yeah.
With the other buildings, this seems like a completely, like the police station and this high school seem like different flavors than everything else. I know that in Marblehead, or Wilmington and Marblehead, they were doing projects, they wanted them, all the buildings to tie together, they wanted to be cohesive. So, but
there's, I would say, the police station aside.
Yeah.
Like, this building has like masonry, it's got gravitas, it's got dignity, and maybe people may think it's ugly, but it has like a lot of like the weight that the other buildings have, and like a sense of like entry point that that's meant order to and welcome people. So I think that, yeah, the style's really different for sure, but it has that ties things together. You know, if you look at the photo of the entrance, I think more so than like that. Maybe that is, I don't know what that photo is.
yeah, just I walk, you know, if I haven't been to some of these buildings, but if I walk up to the city hall, I feel like, wow, it's interesting, it's welcome, I feel welcome to go there, just on something about the building architecture. Coming to the high school, I don't feel, it feels very cold, very distant. Part of it's because it's so far set back in the entrances, you know,
It is set back.
yeah.
And it again, doesn't have a super clear entrance because of where you drive up. You then have to turn, you don't see it, you know, like all of these, you see very clearly where you go in or what's standing out. And the high school doesn't have that unless you know to turn and go to a certain spot and you're like, oh, there it is. And all the other schools, I think, feel like they have more of an entrance too in the district.
Yeah. Somebody has their entrance.
My glasses, we can see Delia.
Hi, everybody. Sorry to be on Zoom while you are all in person. But in thinking about your question, I was just considering the different users of the high school, and in particular, the students. One might argue that the way in which this project is connected to kind of like the civicness of Medford could be in demonstrating what that means for students. So, you know, in educating students what it is to be civically minded, or you know, even thinking about other users like the greater community, you know, being you know, connected, being a space in which community can gather, or to demonstrate to itself how to how to show what belonging means, or you know, showing up for each other means, or you know, any number of values that we might identify. So I think there's a really core component, like what distinguishes perhaps this from some of the other buildings would be the student component, that it can educate in a way, what it means to be civically minded.
Paul says hand up.
Paul, go ahead.
Thank you. It's sort of jumping off of what Delia had said. You know, when you were describing how a lot of architecture seems to be reflecting on a better time, I mean, we don't have to get into how was it really a better time. You know, nostalgia is often not related to reality, and so, but I think, you know, the school is always about the future. It's like by default. Um, you know, certainly we can have seniors in for education, but we don't make people go to high school or public school at the end of their lives for a reason, because this is helping them prepare to go forward. And so I do hope we can sort of avoid any kind of nostalgia approach to design. You know, like when we were building ships, it's a part of Medford's history. I'm not saying that's not important, but there were also a lot of enslaved people here, and we often just move along as if we just had ships and rum and everything was dandy. And that's not the truth. And I do feel uncomfortable sort of perpetuating the myth of how great things used to be, because I think it doesn't serve, in particular, it doesn't serve our students who, if they're doing a good, if we're doing a great job teaching them, then they are going to be far more aware than the rest of us sitting here of what history really was like. So, you know, I think I love this look across the architecture of the city, and the library in particular. I think there's a way to weave in, you know, a theme, if you will, like whether ships and shipbuilding is a theme we can weave in or not, is I think something that would be interesting to explore, because a bunch of buildings that aren't related at all doesn't feel like it's part of a community necessarily. But I do think figuring out how we can make sure it's forward facing and not based on nostalgia is super important. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to take one more. I think Jesse, you have your hand up, and then we're going to shift forward just to make sure that we can touch on some of the other topics for today.
Thanks. I'm just wondering, based on like the talk about nostalgia and how things fit into Medford, just to me, I feel like the usability and the sort of accessibility of the building winds up communicating its belonging far more than, you know, trying to tap into what is Medford's character and its architecture, just because that's always changing. But you know, to me, like a wildly different architectural style, if that were to be used in the high school, wouldn't necessarily doom itself to being unsuccessful if it doesn't fit into a sort of Medford character so much as if it doesn't if it doesn't communicate that this is for everyone in the town, the way, you know, some of the older civic buildings and the new library seem very accessible and usable, versus the current high school, which, you know, looks more like industrial sort of, and like a hydroelectric dam or something that we're not, you know, you're not really sure where the access points are and what's happening inside of it. That's all.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and for clarity, I don't think we're suggesting that there's any emulation that we're sort of putting forth at this point. We were really just and you all done a fantastic job of just sort of thinking about the topic and sort of whether or not there's sort of guidance there or thoughts, lessons to be taken from what's in there. But there's certainly more to come on that conversation as we move forward in the process. So we're going to talk a little bit more about exterior materials, right? So just to keep going on the theme of precedents within, in this case, the district. We have here the other school buildings that are located within the city. The elementary schools and the middle schools here. And you can see there's a good predominance of brick with some accent materials associated with them. As we think about what materials may end up on the exterior of the building, we really need to keep in mind, first and foremost, that we're designing and building buildings that have a 50 to 75-year lifespan to them, right? So at that initial point, it's going to preclude the use of some more residential scale products. We're not designing vinyl siding on school buildings. We're not probably designing even wood siding on natural wood siding on school buildings, given sort of the upkeep that is associated with them. So these are a collection of typical materials. Brick is certainly one of them, and it is found in the city as we just showed, and in the district as we just showed. And it's not to say that these are the full collection of materials that are out there. We'd love to hear there's other materials that anyone has experience with or interest in that we can investigate and move forward to the process. But moving from sort of left to right is that natural materials in terms of stone, actual real stone applied to a building, brick itself in terms of a clay fired process, and that can take different forms. There can also be thin versions of those. So there's different ways of putting up exterior materials on a building, whether they're laid in beds of mortar, which is sort of a more traditional approach, or sort of applied in more of a rain screen approach. There's metal panel, which can take all sorts of different forms in terms of corrugations, in terms of the metals that are being used, in terms of the finish that is applied to those metals, but metal can have that durability to them. There's other types of rain screen panels, whether they're phenolic panels, and phenolic is like a fancy word for like a resin or a plastic at the end of the day that's sort of modified for outdoor exposure and durability and longevity. They can have different types of materials sort of inlaid into them. So there's like wood look phenolic panels that exist out there that are used in rain screen systems. There's also porcelain panels, which again have sort of that clay base to them. That can provide a lot of durability. They can have sort of shiny reflective finishes and glossy finishes or matte finishes. There's a wide range there. And then there's terracotta panels as well. And these are generally graded from left to right. And we'll get into the next slide in terms of price point to them. Cost is, of course, going to be a factor in terms of the selection of the materials, but it plugs into the overall set of criteria that we're going to be using, right? Their aesthetics play a role, sustainability plays a role in terms of our selection of exterior materials, both in terms of how much energy it takes to actually fabricate these things and how many natural resources are consumed to do that. So it's a very sort of complex selection process that we'll get into as we move forward in terms of what the exterior materials on the building will end up being. And again, these are just the opaque materials, right? We haven't even got into the topic of fenestration and what are the things that we look through made of. But sticking with those
Fenestration.
Yeah.
fenestration, which is again fancy word for window, essentially. So maybe I'll try to just keep on the simpler side of the terminology. But architects, we like to trend into all the fancy words that we know, and I'll try to check myself on that.
Now I know people feel when I'm talking about technology.
It's similar, yes. So I talked a little bit about sort of the cost spectrum in terms of materials, but also sort of the the durability of materials that we go through in terms of how we can sort of plot where different materials fall on this range. So we have sort of durability is our range on the top left there, and then cost running across the bottom. You can see that masonry or brick has that sort of interesting position of being extremely durable and having a lot of longevity to it, and also being sort of on the lower price point. And that is the very reason why you see brick on so many public buildings, because it does fit into a lot of sort of beneficial categories that way. There's a lot that we can do with brick. There's a lot of creativity that has been really investigated over the course of history with that. So it is a material that can be considered as part of the exterior palette as we move forward. But again, you get a sense from looking at this where some of those other materials fall in terms of that spectral graph that we've been looking at. And the one in the upper right-hand corner is maybe a little bit more interesting in terms of building integrated photovoltaic panels or solar panels actually applied to the base of the building. We don't see that too often around in terms of public school buildings in Massachusetts, are really too much within the country, because it is at the upper end of both the first cost investment of what goes in there, and then also in terms of durability, it is not going to last quite as long as an active technology than some of the other materials. But
Saying the lower on the graph, the more durable?
correct, yeah. So, and then to the right-hand side, being more expensive. And then just a sampling of exterior buildings, exteriors of buildings. These are actually all SMMA projects, but just give you a sense of the range of materials that are out there as options. Again, you see a lot of brick here, but there is some composition and juxtaposition of the brick, both with modern sort of aesthetics and approaches, and juxtaposed with renovated portions of buildings, glass, certainly to help both perforate the exterior of the building, right? An exterior of the building with no windows in it is not a nice building to be inside at all. So we will sort of understand that mix and that composition between glazing and opaque wall assemblies. And just some closer up views of some, again, exteriors of SMMA projects, just to give you a sense of some of the options and opportunities that are out there. This first one was Waltham High School, a mix of granite base, a lot of brick, but then also accent panels of composite aluminum panels up above, or rain screen panels. This is the Wakefield Memorial High School, which is currently under construction, so we don't have finished, but a similar palette here in terms of materials. So it's not that we're arriving at these similar palettes because we're trying to design every building in a similar manner. It's more sort of the conversations like this one that we're having now and that we'll have moving forward, both here and with the full building committee, to sort of understand what is that right mix of exterior materials that we want to be using, both to talk to the character of what we're designing, but also sort of longevity of what we're designing.
And it's good to show that night view too, because it is a building that is used more than just the day. So it's always good to think about building throughout the life cycle of its day. How you signal what spaces are, welcoming, and talked about that beacon at the very beginning. Not that you're trying to spill daylight out into the fells, but it will be larger spaces that are used at night.
Yeah, I mean, designing with light is really an option that we have moving forward and available to us, and something that we want to consider in terms of how we create a welcoming appearance at night. But also the opaque materials change at night, right? It's really the inverse condition in terms of how you approach the building and where your focus is. So it's something that we'll look at both during the day and in the evening as we're studying renderings and things as we move forward. The Somerville High School does have a large proportion of terracotta paneling on the exterior of it. And that was really more due to the fact that we were building here in a historical context with a Carnegie Public Library that was immediately adjacent to the building, which had terracotta detailing that was connected and relayed into the brickwork. This is not that similar type of terracotta, but here we were connecting back to the concept of the materiality. And so it's a way of taking sort of that historical connection, reinterpreting it, providing sort of a modern aesthetic using a different kind of material. And this is a recently completed public charter school down in Roxbury. Again, using traditional materials, and this is a lot of brick again, but it has sort of what's called an iron spot, which is sort of a metal that's actually cast in and gives off a reflection, sort of a purplish hue, and really plays with the light in interesting ways when brick hits it. So again, just going to different ways of using more traditional materials. There's definitely options available to us, and this mixes in some metal panel that's both sort of an opaque color and a wood look color as well. And this is the Concord Middle School, which also just recently completed. Almost 100% of the exterior of this building is brick. There's a little bit of concrete masonry unit as well that has a polished surface to it. So different types of masonry can be used. And this actually had a lot of different sort of striations, layers of brick to add some texture and color to the exterior of the building. So we'll pause there.
Can I ask about the windows?
Sure.
Is that to prevent, is that to provide shade?
So the horizontal projections that you see coming out, yes, yeah, they're solar control devices. So what they're trying to do and what they do, especially when they're positioned on the southern facade, they work most effectively on the southern facade, is they control the amount of sunlight and solar energy that's coming into the building during the summer months, right? And they're designed in a way so they have louvers, like little slats on them, so that during the winter, when the sun is lower, you actually do get that sun coming in to the windows and actually doing some passive heating of the space. And in the summer, when the sun is higher, the louvers and the depth of the shade is blocking out the sun's heat that's getting into the building. So they're part of an overall sort of passive design strategy that we end up using. So they're located on this building as well, but they're located in vertical arrangements primarily, except for where it was the science lab renovation added some of these horizontal sunshades as well. The vertical ones they're more decorative, I would say. Generally, they're more effective on like an eastern and western elevation, but they're not as effective as what we would do here. So they were definitely popular in terms of the aesthetics of the 70s when these buildings were designed. But when we use them today, we really try to make sure that they're purposeful in terms of the orientation of the building and what they're actually going to be doing from a passive design perspective.
In this particular photo in school, are those all operational windows or no?
Each of the windows does have an operable vent to it. You can sort of see that little piece that's kicking out at an angle, opens up to allow for some immediate user control of the environment. But there's other portions of these windows that are solid and opaque and fixed. But we do provide, and we will provide here moving forward, operable windows in every classroom just for give teachers control over that environment, getting fresh air if you want that option.
And it should be a lot quieter. So any new window will be triple glazed. So right now you have a single pane. So that parent popping out your classroom window, it'll be a little quieter perhaps.
Any other thoughts just about the types of materials of appropriate other materials that maybe we didn't show examples of that there's interest in us exploring?
It's probably a little bit hard to be abstract without,
a form.
a form and a building to look at.
Brian's physically raising his hand.
Yeah.
Oh,
Brian?
on Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brian.
Hi guys, hopefully you can hear me on Zoom. So
Yeah.
what I like about this, the Concord School that you've got up right now, and particularly how well it sort of speaks back to the landscape that's right there. And a lot of that brickwork, masonry work really reminds me of our site in some semblance, simply because we're dealing with a lot of rock, a lot of strata, a lot of, the fells and that sort of back and forth speaking to each other. So I'm just curious if there's a concept even based around perhaps literally the term strata for some of the sediment layers, things like that, whatever we find when we start digging into that site. But I like that sort of I guess conversation back to nature, and perhaps we can pull some of the materials from the fells and some of those layered ideas, both like horizontally and even like I love layers in architecture from from nature to the interior. And if we can get some of those layers involved, that might inform maybe how we use some of the materials that you guys had shown up on the screen earlier.
It
That's
feels
it.
more wood-like on the top. I don't know, it's because of the lines, give me grain or the color tone and the proximity of the trees and everything. It feels more natural than concrete.
Right. But all
Yeah.
brick, I mean, it's the buff sort of color of it that ties into it. And also, but it's a really rich area to explore, and certainly something that we can look into as we move forward, those connections to nature and the fells, which is so predominant on the site, for sure.
Yeah. But so I was just going to say, I mean, it's still, it's still masonry, but somebody just mentioned it. I mean, even the way you've striated that masonry could talk to like a tree ring or something like that. It's you can see it in there somehow. It's not much of a stretch to connect with still that same palette that you guys showed earlier.
Now, that road is not passable.
No, that's an set of outdoor classrooms that are down there, so it's pedestrian access as it runs around.
So they didn't in this building have the ability to start to navigate the outside of the building?
They did not. So there's a conversation with the fire department. We haven't had that conversation with the fire department here. We will be having it very soon. There was a significant grade drop off here around the back of the building as well, so that contributed to it. It wasn't a place that you would want to take a fire truck. So they acknowledged that and worked with us. So it can be done this way. It's true. I'm going to keep us moving forward. And I don't want to shortchange Sarah too much on the timing here, but Sarah, I think I'm going to give you about 10 minutes for each of these, the last two sort of chapters that we have.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'll go through it as quickly as I can, but feel free to interrupt me because again, as we've been talking about, a lot of this is reflecting what we've heard and we want everybody's feedback. So just stop me if I'm freezing too quickly. So first and foremost, I just wanted to kind of introduce a few key elements of interior design that we'll be talking about today and in the future. It's definitely not an exhaustive list, but these are all elements that really work together and are related and add different layers to the space. So again, space is three-dimensional, it's creating our flow, and really this is tied so closely to our educational plan and all of the visioning meetings that we've been having. Color, obviously, it's more than just aesthetics. It really does impact, school identity, wayfinding. It can support accessibility goals. So, looking at contrast and things like that, how it can impact mood. All of that color theory is something that we'll be exploring as we, move forward in design. And very closely related to that is lighting. We've talked a lot today about natural light and daylight, but obviously once you move into the building and, we do, flood it with as much natural daylight as possible, but artificial light is also something that's going to be studied and considered, right? We want to make sure that we're providing the appropriate illumination for all of the activities happening, but, it also does have a big impact on color. And impacts mood. The other two I wanted to touch on really quickly are often overlooked, but a layer that can really make an impact is texture and pattern. And texture can either be physical touch or it can be something that you perceive visually. And pattern can both just be, you know, a repetition of lines, but it's also a rhythm that you can feel within the space. And so that's something that we're gonna look at as we move into the next slide and we look at some of the goals that we're looking to explore. So, you know, shifting into what we think we heard in the first meeting, and again, we've talked a lot about this today. These are high-level goals, but really are going to help guide our design process, particularly in the interior. So, you know, wanted to make sure this aligns with the goals of this group. So moving into the interior materials, you know, we heard you that they're going to be purposeful, durable, and value-driven. And obviously they'll all be evaluated for maintenance and our sustainable goals. Also, we've talked a lot about the importance of the connection to the exterior, both the glazing, creating a visual and physical connection, but the design palette and overall design goals for the exterior definitely trickle into the interior as well. And we want to design something that encourages movement, engagement, student autonomy was something that was brought up in the last meeting, and really providing materials and patterns that can support that. And then again, we really want to root this in a timeless, neutral palette, and be very intentional about the different accent colors and lighting features and things like that to build upon that neutral palette. So just a quick check-in that this kind of aligns with everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
One thing just for some interior materials, like sitting in this room here, I know this is specifically a no wax floor. But it always strikes me as feeling dirty. It doesn't, and it hasn't held up well. And I know hopefully newer materials that are low maintenance will look better longer, kind of thing. That makes sense.
It does. It does, yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about some specific materials and how we can really achieve these goals, even in like the next couple of slides. So, but all of that feedback's excellent. So yeah, so basically in order to reach those goals, we do kind of reference back to some basic interior design principles. And what I've put together here is also a couple of precedent images of recent SMMA projects, just as examples. You know, there's a lot of different elements here. So again, feel free to jump in if any of these speak to you or don't. One of the things that we talked about was the connections to nature. And so I've got a photo here of our rooftop terrace at Waltham High School. And so this is something where, again, it can be glazing and views that create that connection to nature, but it can also be a direct physical connection. So that's something that we can explore moving forward. Another image here is comfort, comfort and well-being focused. So, you know, this isn't just about lighting and thermal comfort or healthy materials, but it can also be tied directly to the educational plan. So an example here is a health assisting program at Waltham High School. So obviously, you know, lighting, healthy materials, all of that was a part of it, but it can really drive into the educational programming as well. Celebrating diversity. There are so many different ways that you can do this, and obviously we'll fine tune this so that way it's Medford specific. What we're showing here is again Waltham High School, and this tile mosaic is a direct result of student surveys. And they wanted to showcase fabric patterns from the various sculptures that were represented by the student body. And so that was a way that we were able to celebrate diversity in a physical representation in that school. And then showing also adaptable and flexible spaces. We've talked about that today. You know, again, this can mean many things. What I'm showing here is an example of a new educational program to Waltham High School. This is their environmental science lab. And here really it was about providing them flexibility as the program grew. So, you know, durable materials, but flexible space as well. So we're seeing the lab space with power cord reels from the ceiling. So that way you can move the furniture around, access right next to it with a classroom, also access to the green roof right outside. So taking all of that into consideration. And then on this slide, a couple more precedent images here. We've talked about honoring history, but also embracing the future. So again, many ways that this could be done. It could be done with graphics, which we'll talk about a little bit. It could be done with salvaged items from the existing site or historical artifacts that are important to Medford. So many opportunities there. Intuitive wayfinding and placemaking. This is definitely, especially for a large school, really critical. Good space planning is important, but we want to make it as easy as possible to know where you're at in the building and also get to your next destination, get from point A to point B. Equitable and universal design. Code compliant accessibility is obviously given. But we also can consider thoughtful ways to make the building as friendly as possible to everyone. This can be done in a lot of different ways. We're showing here one way that's also you're showcasing where you're at, but it's also can be educational. So we're showing the arts in both enlarged Braille as well as ASL. Access to daylight, obviously critical as we move forward with our space planning, particularly for art spaces or visual arts. And really it all boils down to things being durable and timeless. So, again, avoiding trendy materials and products. And, we can talk a little bit more about the interior materials on the next slides.
Yeah, and Sarah, I'm gonna actually say that we're gonna pause just a second here, because just to take a second and talk through any of those topics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're gonna run out of time here, I think, pretty quickly. I want to make sure we can talk to environmental graphics quickly as well.
Sure.
Thoughts, though, maybe about what we've shown here in terms of some of these interior material guiding principles.
I really like the health assistant. It's just that flooring really kind of like guides you for what the separate areas are, lighting.
Yeah, again, subtle wayfinding, right? And just kind of really diving into the, how much that pattern can help with the flow of the space. And yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful program, and really the space just is kind of the cherry on top to that.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say, sort of jumping off what you said at the beginning about doing more with less and not having anything decorative without purpose. So I'm looking at some of these slides, and the celebrating diversity is absolutely beautiful. And there was one on the next page, the hallway in the top left. They're beautiful, but I'm thinking of students with visual impairments in particular, and with a lot of different colors and a lot of different patterns and so forth, coming in and feeling sort of like sensory overload from just a visual perspective. And so I'm just being mindful. And then it's going back to the slide again, the celebrating diversity. I'm looking at those colors and they're gorgeous, but I'm also looking at those white tables and how they blend in with the floor. And if you're distracted by all that color above you, straight into the table. That's sort of the perspective I'm coming from in terms of like making it accessible. That's sort of, and it ties in with the wayfinding and the
absolutely
that helps the same with the floor, making it sort of just intuitive. So that's one thing that jumped out at me, kind of keeping that in mind.
For sure. No, that's great feedback. And definitely, I think finding that balance, right, of, making things comfortable for everybody, right? And, and to your point, being intentional about where the accent colors are, what the contrast is, and actually making sure that we are achieving that goal.
Sometimes it's also about how you shape, large space, that there's nooks and little spaces, so you're not like in the middle of it all. I know at my daughter's school, when I first walked in there, exactly what you said, it had like, it's a 90s school, so it had like a checkerboard.
Very overwhelming pattern.
It's just gaudy, and like, and it's just like a space that is all visual like
Right.
energy everywhere, so it's like trying to sculpt spaces in a way that are proportioned well, lit well, and have the interior palette that supports, just it's a pleasant and navigatable space.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, we can skip the environmental graphics if you'd like, Matt, and we can come back to
I'm just gonna let people know that we're skipping over something that is still very important in terms of talking about healthy materials, red list avoidance, of materials. We are gonna get into that a little bit in the next advisory team meeting, if you want to stay for that, but it gets back to this topic that we're not talking in silos here, we're overlapping consideration of materials. I did want to talk, really quickly about experiential, graphic design though, Sarah. So if you want to try to get through this material pretty quickly, I'll give us a couple minutes at the end, just to wrap up.
Yeah, no, I will give the quickest overview. So basically, experiential graphics, or XGD, is all about bringing visual graphic elements into the space. And it goes really hand in hand with the rest of the building design and can exist in a variety of formats. And really, the three major questions that we look at all kind of stem from the audiences, right? So there's three major audiences for a school. It's the students, it's the staff, and the community. And all of that ties back to, what is the content? Where is it going? Can we tie content into the programming? Is it located near the gym versus a classroom? And then what does it look like? It also includes what is it made out of and how is it maintained? And then for goals, again, this is something that we work with each school for unique project specific goals, but these are ones that we try to achieve in every environment. And it's really about connecting those three audiences, the students, the staff, and the community, to the space through a cohesive system. And again, responding to the other design elements, interior, architectural, and the site. And then creating different strategies, again, to encourage educational opportunities, not just inside the classroom, using the building as a teaching tool. And then, first, a critical element is obviously providing clear and functional wayfinding, and really cementing those important places throughout the school. And again, these are just some visuals from some recent projects. So a few examples here about connecting the individuals to the space. And we can just kind of flip through these very quickly, Matt, if you'd like. Again, responsive graphic design. So a lot of these are that image for Wakefield. Those are acoustic wall panels. So again, it's providing graphics, but at the same time, it's helping with the acoustics of the media center. Let's see, the next slide we can talk about. So these are some great examples of creating educational opportunities, again, based on some context. So, we have a graphic in the architectural drafting hallway of Somerville that really highlights the entire plan of the space. And then we've got informational signage for those tile murals that we were talking about to explain what are you really looking at, what are the parts and the pieces, as well as some lead signage as well, just to better understand what the building system is actually doing. And then some examples of wayfinding and placemaking. So from stairwells, knowing which level you're on, the building entrance, site signage, even just welcoming in to the main office, all of those things can be part of XGD. And this is just a quick example of, again, we're looking at everything as a suite. So everything works together, it's all cohesive, and has a similar language. And the last slide is basically just a quick process that is really where once there is a building and we start to get a little bit further into design in the next phase, we'll start with surveys to really help inform those project goals and develop the concept and the content.
And this will really be one of maybe like a splinter group that comes out of this, and we'll probably work to try to find some student voice to pull into this, because it's really critical to making sort of any experiential graphic connected to the school community. I think we've heard that in a variety of ways already, and Suzanne mentioned at the beginning that the student input is just critical, and it's been very insightful to date wherever we've been able to make those connections. The other thing I'll just add on to the end of Sarah's piece here is the fact that there's actually a lot of experiential graphic activity and that's already in the building today. Particularly the CTE programs have been very prolific in terms of generating some amazing things that are on the walls, either outside their shop spaces or inside their shop spaces. And what we want to do is try to amplify that, right? There's some great ideas that we've heard also about things that we have been done in the past that we can bring back, new things that we can do moving forward. So this will be definitely a comprehensive lens that we'll use for the entirety of the school, not just sort of one particular area of the student body that we're talking to and thinking and working with. So we are pretty much at the end of our time. So I want to take a quick second to go through the next steps in terms of what's coming, including confirmation that we're going to come back together on March 10th in terms of having a subsequent discussion. That will be at 5:30. We're going to be doing it again as this remote hybrid setup, probably in this room, but we'll confirm that when we get a little bit closer in terms of the timing. The organization of what we'll be doing at that third meeting is that we'll actually be looking at something a lot less interesting than sort of slides with graphics on them. We're going to be going through a spreadsheet. I know that sounds exciting, which has essentially all of the topics that have come out of both the initial session and sort of the dialogue that we've had here as recommendations back to the full building committee. And we're going to categorize those into 3 different groups. We're going to have some given items, and we're going to do sort of a traffic signal analogy on this. So the givens are going to be green light items. We won't need to talk about them at the next meeting, but we'll run through the list to just confirm that they are there as recommendations going back. There's going to be some flashing yellow items as well that we're going to have some discussion about in this meeting when we get together again. And we'll just see where those sort of, they're not pain points or friction points, but things that really there's different perspectives that we want to talk through and make sure that we have a consensus agreement on. And then we may also have some red light items, items that we're not going to be pushing forward as recommendations. So that's what we can look forward to as we move forward into the next meeting. But definitely thank everybody for their time. Those that are in person, those that are remote. We know that everyone's time is valuable, especially in the evenings. So appreciate any way that you've been able to join us, however that is. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have some folks in for the next advisory team meeting, so there is no rest for us that are multiple. Thank you. MEP Systems and Sustainability Advisory Team. We'll probably take about 5 minutes. We'll let other people filter in, and we're going to get everything set up, and then we'll get going right at about 5:35.
You're on.
Alrighty, for everybody online and everyone in the room, we're gonna get going here with our meeting number 2 for our Sustainability and MEP Systems Advisory Team meeting. The agenda for today, we're gonna do a quick set of introductions again, just to remind you who we are and who's speaking. I know we were all remote last time, so being in person, maybe it'll be illuminating as to who we are this time around. If there was anyone that is part of the team that was identified as part of the team but wasn't able to make the first meeting, I do want to give just a couple of minutes to anyone that's in that category to introduce yourselves, your connection to the project, and your priorities and goals, similar to what we did with the entire group at the first meeting, just because we want to make sure that we have the ability to hear from everybody. So after we get through that sort of introductory piece, we're going to break the discussion down into a series of chapters of the discussion. And each chapter will really involve a little bit of presentation of material. We're essentially going to be reflecting back what we heard the first time around during the first conversation. And we tried to group the similar types of comments or thoughts into these chapters. So we won't be talking to you for 45 minutes and then we wait and have a conversation. We're just going to go piece by piece. If we get to the point where we're at our time limit, I'll just have to move us along. So I'll apologize in advance if I need to cut anybody off. But that'll be generally the content of the second meeting. And then we'll talk about next steps as we get to the end, though if you were here at the tail end of the last meeting, you've had a little bit of a spoiler. It's very similar in terms of what we're going to be doing for each of the groups. So real just quick on the introduction side. My name is Matt Rice. I'm an architect with SMMA. Helen, I know, is online with us.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. Helen Fantini, project manager with SMMA.
I think Sawala is with us as well online.
Everyone, good to see you all. This is Swala Jenka, architectural designer at SMMA.
All right, and I think we have folks in the room.
I'm Martine Dion. I'm the Sustainable Design Director at SMMA. I'm Emily Ehlers. I'm a mechanical engineer at SMMA.
I'm Andrew Barrows. I'm an electrical engineer at SMA.
Luke Reiser, member of the Bedford High School.
Oh, sorry, we're just gonna keep going through the design team folks. And then,
Oh,
not
sorry,
as
I thought
opposed to
we were
around the
on
room.
the table. I thought we were down
I don't mean to cut you off.
No, that's fine.
Brenda, you're online too?
Yes, hello everyone, Brenda Lamb, Sustainable Design Team Member.
Okay, I don't think Tommaso's online with us, is James online?
Yeah.
Yes, James Job, Egal Engineering, Plumbing and Fire Protection.
Okay. It's not that I don't want everyone to introduce yourselves again. I just want to try to conserve as much time as possible. This is everyone on the Medford team. Again, is there anyone that was not with us for the first meeting that didn't get a chance to introduce themselves and sort of their goals, online or in the room? Libby, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, I'm Libby Brown. I'm an architect and parent. I'm on the school building committee, and I saw the list of goals, the sort of summary of last time, and those look great. I don't really have anything specific to add. But I'll say hi to James. He was my engineer, EMS law only. So hi, James. Nice to see you again.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm Sarah Michaelman. I'm online. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person. I unfortunately missed the last meeting. So I'm a community member. I've lived in Medford for 22 years. My daughter went all the way through the Medford school system, starting in kindergarten. She's long out of the system now, but my son is about to graduate from the high school. And I agree with Libby. I did watch the video of the last meeting. You guys covered a lot of ground in terms of goals for the project. I agree with all of them. So my background and why I'm here. I am a sustainable design consultant by trade. I work with a firm out in West Concord, and have worked on a lot of MSBA school projects over the years as a consultant working with the architects. Just one thing I do want to add is I'd love to see this building be resilient and potentially a community resource should there be any catastrophic events where people need shelter, vaccines, water, or food, that it could be a resource for that, and along those same lines have that kind of passive survivability. and be able to, maintain comfortable temperatures and things should there be an electrical outage, et cetera, if it's used as a shelter. One thing I wanted to add.
Thank you so much. That is great. And I realize that we had not gotten into that whole notion of shelter usage and shelter designation is something that we need to. Something that we'll have connected conversations with first responders as well in terms of understanding sort of what the city's perspective is from those departments. But we can definitely wrap in what that means from a resiliency standpoint as well. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Just really quick on our schedule again. We are still
Recorded.
Oh. Emily's doing some extra recording for us.
Sorry, I thought I had it. There.
Okay. Fall 2030 is our target school opening date at the moment. We are very much not quite there yet. We're at the beginning of this feasibility study process where we are right now. We do have these touch points of advisory team meetings. This second one that we're going to have is the last one in the first part of the feasibility study, and we're just getting into sort of the semantics of the MSBA process. But understand that we're going to get together 2 more times after this as an advisory team with each category that we're looking at. And again, the fact that this is not an isolated conversation, it's not a siloed conversation. We do have these 4 different teams that are meeting to talk on these particular topics. There are overlaps that's inherent and intended and beneficial to the process as we go through. But at the end of the day, from these advisory teams, there will be a series of recommendations that we're going to be sharing back to the full building committee. And they will have the ability to accept or not accept those recommendations. But this is the process in terms of collecting expertise and input really from experts within the community on these particular topics. Very quick refresher on the objective of the topic of what we're going to be talking through, but I think this one is very self-explanatory in terms of the title of the advisory team. And then we're going to jump right into topics and priorities. I'm going to hand it over here to Martina to start off.
So we're gonna browse through some of these. We've got it all there, but I'm not gonna name them one by one. But the last meeting, we went through the givens, the specialized code, the MSBA requirements, LEED, etc. And then the Medford, some of the Medford sustainability policy and guidelines. And then we got a good amount of your great feedback and discussion points at that meeting. And what we did is we organized them. There was one particular comment about understanding what LEED is and giving a LEED overview. So we'll do that briefly and we'll have a bit of a discussion around that. This is not to go through the whole LEED set of criteria, but you will see that throughout the topics we're going to go through. Some of those are going to fall, within the following discussions. Climate resiliency, so we sort of bundled in there, obviously energy efficiency. We're going to talk about mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. Operations and maintenance was something that was near and dear to some of you. We're going to brush a bit on passive design strategies, and Sarah, thank you for bringing that up because that's something that's going to be part of the project in terms of resiliency. And then renewable energy, EV charging. There was another set of comments around embodied carbon, so we're going to spend a bit of time talking about this today. Healthfulness, environmental quality, and literacy, and environmental literacy. We sort of bundled sort of the ventilation, daylight, and everything that has to do with connectivity to nature and sustainable sites. And then there were some comments about cost effectiveness. So we wanted to make sure that we're going to give you an overview of some of the life cycle cost analysis that we're going to be providing in schematic design, and it's required by MSBA, but we're going to give you some example of what it entails.
Right. And this particular topic is fraught with acronyms. So LCCA down there at the bottom is life cycle cost analysis. We'll try to make sure that we explain those as we go through for folks listening in now or after.
Right. So lead, just to respond a bit to the comment from the last time, leadership on energy and environmental design is what this acronym stands for. It's a green building standard that was developed in the mid to late 1990s. And it was fully launched commercially in the early 2000s. MSBA adopted it in the late 2000s as a requirement for designing schools in Massachusetts and getting reimbursement for MSBA. The green building certification system is in its 5th version. So your building will be registered under V5, which is a bit of an overhaul over the previous version. We're not gonna go into that. But basically the way this comprehensive green building certification is set is into these categories that you see there. And many of your comments from last meeting sort of fall into the criteria. Each of these categories have a set of criteria. And MSBA requires a minimum of silver certification. So we're gonna have to apply all the prerequisites and and a good amount of the criteria from each of these categories. As we go through and talk about the different topics tonight, we're gonna highlight which of those are already included in the LEED certification that you will have to, the product has to pursue. The version 5 has sort of rebalanced a bit the sort of the weighing of the criteria within the system. They put, obviously you can see there, decarbonization is a big component of it. Quality of life and then ecological conservation and restoration. Those are the sort of big chunks of the reweighing that they've done in the V5 next. So this is what the scorecard, we're not gonna go through this point by point, but you're gonna see this throughout the process of the design process. There's a scorecard, which at each of those categories that you saw on the previous slide has a set of criteria, and we need to design to that criteria. We're going to present to you updates periodically throughout the whole design to show how we're sort of qualifying to meet the silver certification at minimum. Next. So just one very early sort of look at it. In order to get to silver, we need 50 points minimum through this criteria. We did a very preliminary assessment, you know, sort of targeting, we need to target more than 50 to make sure we get 50. And then there's options here to go to either gold or platinum. And I know in some other meetings, there may have been some comments about, you know, gold or platinum. And that's not something that we are going to decide for you. We want you to voice your wish, and then we're going to analyze and show you what it takes to get to gold or platinum. That's really, right?
Yeah, so just to clarify that a bit more, so I think we want to be clear about what our sustainability goal and why we are looking for a particular rating, right? The silver certification through USGBC, that's going to get us MSBA funding. So that's a clear goal and a rationale for why we want to do that.
That's a given.
If we're going to gold or platinum, are we interested in just that designation, that recognition that comes from the USGBC? Are we interested in sort of the core sustainability benefits that are behind those ratings and sort of what matters as we move forward in the process? So it's a little bit of a higher level question, but I think it is worth a little bit of discussion as well. And this is like the last slide that we have on this section, right? So we can,
I believe so,
can
yes.
pivot there. I know Luke had his hand up.
And so, you know, like I've reviewed other high school projects throughout the Commonwealth. I know you're the designers for Wakefield. They're doing something interesting with a microgrid. Perhaps you could confirm, because, you know, news articles are not half accurate, right? Did they try to attain LEED Gold or LEED Platinum? And then did they back off? And what did they back off to? I think I know the answers, but it's just based on the news article.
Can I also practice what version of LEED was for? Are they?
So Wakefield is LEED V4. And the community supported, silver, minimum. And they had aspiration for gold, so,
That's what I read.
and so what happens when we do aspiration is that we sort of build as much as we can towards gold, and submit everything we can that would, you know, reach gold, but there's not as much, there are, you know, there are some criteria that they're not willing to extend to, whether it's budgetary or for some other reason, maintenance or whatever. And so there was a discussion throughout and we kept track. I think, there's still an aspiration for gold, but there's no final saying until the building is fully certified. And that won't happen for a couple of years, I think, or a year and a half.
Okay.
Tracking silver? You said aspirational for, are they tracking silver or are they tracking gold?
We're tracking silver, but with high enough, points that we're borderline gold territory. But we cannot say we're tracking.
Right,
gold.
no, I get
You
it.
understand?
Which just for reference, is exactly what happened in Somerville. Like, we tracked silver all the way along. They actually just got their gold certification. It does take a couple years after the building opens to get it sometimes in terms of the back and forth with UBC, but it's not like it's like a completely unattainable goal or an approach to the project as you track at it. It's really just trying to manage where we're focusing some of the investment on different scope items, where particular points have like just very direct costs associated with them.
And, and I brought up Wakefield, because they've also got a very interesting concept. Now, they have a municipal power company
Munich,
that
yes.
you can
Yeah.
partner with, and they're developing a microgrid with battery
Yes.
backup. And as I was reading that, you know, I saw a lot of appealing aspects, but we don't have a municipal power company. And so I was wondering whether some of the things Wakefield is doing, because that project is pretty far along, are applicable in terms of storage to Medford.
Oh, no, I thought you meant in terms of need. So I was gonna say no, because it's a separate project and, you know, the PV is not installed at.
Now, would
Right.
battery backup have any influence on final
no.
certification? No.
Because it wasn't part of this project and it's not within the lead boundary.
Yeah, but if we incorporate it into our project, yes.
I see.
However, in Lexington, which is not a muni, it's a Massachusetts, PA utility. They've committed and required LEED Gold, aspiration platinum. So in Lexington, they've committed to it as a community. And they've also committed to net zero energy, full site net zero, well, building net zero energy, on site with battery storage. The battery storage, the solar photovoltaic being installed as part of the project does contribute to LEED and LEED points. The battery storage, in LEED V4 less and LEED V5 could have some significant impact in terms of, some of the modified and new criteria within LEED V5. But the really major, benefit of the battery storage is the participation with the utility in the demand response program in, you know, storing the energy, sending it back in the grid and getting the real, so the money benefit of that on top of reducing your peak load, which reduces your peak energy cost, which is also significant, energy savings. So those are the benefits of the storage. The way Wakefield is set up is very different because they're a muni, so they're gonna manage this at not at the building level, but at the city level.
Do we know enough about the existing Medford High School to understand like when the peak load is happening, to understand when like that demand would match up with the solar collection, and whether or not battery is like really an effective use of money?
So when we get to the life cycle cost analysis, I can speak to that a little bit. We've gotten some information, and the nice thing about Medford is you have an energy manager, I think, in town, so we
She has
can.
her hand up now.
Oh, she does.
Let's let Brenda go. Yep.
So basically, to high level, assuming, yes, we're gonna be, we can look at that, we can, look at that in collaboration with the energy manager, get that information and then align with what would be playing out.
Brenda, you wanna go ahead?
So what I originally had put my hand up to say was I think that it's important to aspire to platinum as we're starting this process and moving forward. But I would say that I think that net zero and passive house are potentially more valuable goals. So if we are able to achieve those without achieving LEED platinum, I don't think that would be the end of the world.
Okay, and I'm gonna let Paul go and then gonna move us along, just because again, I want to make sure that we have time to get to the other topics. And I know you feel strongly about this topic, Paul, but go ahead.
I just wanted to sort of echo a bit of what Brenda just said. And, I was having an offline conversation with her and Alicia Hunt, and, being able to stick a thing on the wall that says what our LEED level is actually not something that I care about. I care about the full life cycle cost of operating the building. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Although I also care a lot about reimbursement, getting enough points to get extra money back from MSBA. So both of those things. But like, I'm not attached to being able to proudly say we're a LEED platinum. If we are, that would be great. But let's get there for the right reasons.
So just to clarify, the MSBA reimbursement is tied to the LEED silver. Gold or platinum does not get you more money from MSBA. Meeting the specialized stretch code, which Medford has already sort of adopted, gets you more money with MSBA. And then there are a specific set of credits and criteria, mostly related to indoor environmental quality and materials, that if we meet a higher level of those, there's a basic level required by MSBA. If we meet a higher level, we get an additional 1%. And we plan to, show you and pursue those. That's achievable, and we've been doing so in other projects.
Yeah, and so just to clarify, Paul, you may be thinking that in the past, MSBA has handled the reimbursement and the benefits for different levels of LEED certification in different ways. And they will continue to do that as they go forward. They do track along with how the energy codes adapt and modify and get more stringent over time, and they adapt sort of their reimbursement model a bit as you go year by year. So we'll understand once we get to the point of schematic design, sort of what we're locked into in terms of their policy at that point. So we'll just have to continue to track it as we go through. I am going to push us forward. I think that was great discussion, and I really do appreciate that point that it's not the plaque on the wall that is really driving this, but it's sort of the benefits from a sustainability perspective, environmental perspective. So we're going to shift to climate resiliency as a topic.
So, we had energy there, but before we get to that, we just want to explain that what you're seeing there again is the LEED criteria, and part of climate resiliency involves sustainable sites and transportation and water efficiency, water conservation. So that criteria is part of LEED. These are givens. Transportation demand management, that's something that came up at the last meeting in terms of EV charging station, which we'll talk a bit later in this section, bicycle storage and bicycle charging. So all of this is going to be part, to a certain extent, be included to comply with LEED. For example, the EV charging station for LEED, you need to install 10% under EV5. So these are all givens. Next. In terms of energy and atmosphere, we want to spend a bit of time because there was a lot of talk around this last time, and it's a big chunk. Somebody just made a comment about net zero energy. So in terms of LEED, we have to outperform standards that are part of their criteria. And MSBA looks at that performance and associates a certain amount of LEED points to. They sort of look at that performance to associate LEED points for the stretch code, which they're kind of apples and oranges, but that's their way of benchmarking. And so we really try to optimize the energy performance of the building to really meet MSBA threshold, but also make as much points there. The change in LEED V5 is source energy. We won't go into all those details, but it's source energy based versus site energy based. All of this is supported by the MA specialized stretch code. So there's a lot from that code that's going to support the criteria there. That said, there's a lot of technical things here, but passive strategies are going to be also a priority. Making sure we harvest the free sun. And Emily will talk a bit about that, thinking about wind. At the same time, and then somebody brought up passive survivability, so that will be part of the thinking here in terms of HVAC system and overall resiliency of the site. I won't go through all of this, but to say that commissioning is subsidized by MSBA, so the full commissioning set of mechanical, electrical, plumbing, building enclosure, and actually some ongoing commissioning plan is all included in the MSBA scope and provided by MSBA. Next.
Martine, is the SPC considering bringing on a commissioning agent in schematic design? Because that's what BB5 is requiring. So I was curious if that was a consideration.
So I have questions.
MSBA doesn't bring it on until DD.
Until DD. So I actually have a question because MSBA is going to transition to BB5. So I have a question to them about that, to first clarify if they're going to substantiate, and if not, then we would have to account for.
We've asked them that question and we've heard no.
You've heard no?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'd be curious if you had a different answer.
Or we keep asking, I think the more people that keep asking and pointing out to them,
Okay.
they may have an epiphany there that, geez, we need to adjust our policy.
And then the other thing that they do not provide, if you install a solar PV system, you need to have it commissioned to get the LEED points for the renewable energy. But MSBA does not reimburse that. So you usually have to buy that commissioning separately. Same with the demand response. There's a part of it that's an observation of a test that needs to be done by a commissioning agent. We also need to buy that upfront.
So, I'm just gonna try to keep us on the questions until, let Martine
I'll
get
just
through
go
this
through
piece
my
of it.
slide and then
Circle
we'll
back.
do a quick question. So, no problem. So a lot of you'll see a lot of the schools are targeting EY 25. So to make sure I explain what I mean, energy use intensity. The EY is the metric that we use to compare schools and buildings, actually, all buildings, by using a sort of a nominal energy per square foot per year metric. In this case, we take all the energy loads, whether from fossil fuel or electricity, and we combine them in kBTUs per square foot per year. The target for most schools that are not vocational schools, that are not comprehensive program school, usually is 25. But with the case of your school, which has a comprehensive program, which really requires a bit more energy per square foot than a typical school, we've put a range there of 25 to 35. There's going to be more discussion about that, but we like to set that goal upfront in the project. And we do energy modeling to sort of monitor and target and continue to sort of profile that goal. And how do we get there? And we've got many schools that have achieved the EUI 25 that are not comprehensive. Can you go back? Just want to go to the nice little icons there. So one of the very important component of how to get there is a super insulated enclosure. All of those things are supported by code, but we want to make sure you understand what it is exactly. Super insulated enclosure, triple glazing, all electric HVAC to the extent possible with your program. And then plug load management, which ties into occupant behavior. And then the passive strategies, which I omitted to talk about first, but they're the first thing we look into. Next. And in terms of operational carbon, so all this energy, we're going to talk about embodied carbon later. All this energy is equivalent to greenhouse gas emission. And your existing high school versus the new school. This is not your school. This is an example. When we fine tune your existing high school energy better, we're going to create a bar chart like this and show you where we're looking to go. What you're seeing here is an existing high school, large existing high school, and how an EUI 2530 target reduces the operational carbon over 60 years. So we take the annual emissions and we multiply them by 60. The reason we do that is that when you do modeling and measuring of embodied carbon, you look at it over 60 years. So this discussion will continue at the next meeting, probably in a bit more detail. But we like to look at carbon as total carbon, both operational and embodied carbon. Next.
So like Martine's been saying, when we're designing our spaces, we're not just thinking about what is code required, what the minimums are. We're thinking about a big picture and a lot of different variables. So this carries over into the engineering systems as well. And I was glad to hear a lot of these points were mentioned in the first meeting. So that's great to hear that you're all thinking about all these different buckets that we think about during our design process. So specifically for the mechanical systems, I'm thinking about the comfort and health of the occupants, the safety of the materials that I'm using, the LCCA, as Martine's mentioned, both sustainability and the engineering teams have to consider this. Reliability and maintenance of the building systems, that's very important. The all-electric HVAC systems is a code requirement and a LEED V5 requirement. And then also just the space, not just within the building, but where we're going to place our equipment on the roof. Is it sharing space with the PV solar panels? And then where are we going to take up space on the site? So we have to coordinate with the civil teams and the site teams as well. And then I just wanted to point out this one in particular, which was brought up quite a bit in the first meeting. And again, I'm very happy about that because it's one thing to design a high efficiency, beautiful mechanical building system, but it's an entirely another thing to see it operate as intended. So it's very critical from the beginning of the design process to work with who's going to be operating your system. So Andrew and I have already met with Ken and John for their facilities team to understand how they currently operate, what they're comfortable with, and then for their future, what if they'll be bringing on board more team members to handle the larger systems, or if they're going to incorporate more training to understand these all electric systems and controls, because it's very different than what's currently in the school. And then, as Martine mentioned, we also look at commissioning as a LEED P5 requirement.
So Audrey, I do see your hand up. We'll circle back to you when we get to the question point in this sort of grouping of slides, which will be coming up.
Okay, and then a little bit touched on in the first meeting was specifically the mechanical system options. We're going to dive deeper into these later on in the feasibility phase of the project, but I did just want to quickly bring them up high level for what our all electric system options might be for the school. So the first is a ground source heat pump system, that's geothermal system. The next would be an air source to water heat pump system.
And then the third would be an all air source heat pump system. And then with these three, we can also kind of do a hybrid option where you can take bits and pieces of the different system types and use them for different areas of the school. So it could be for cost reasons, to cut costs. It could be just for flexibility, like what might work well in one space might not work as well in another space of the school. So again, we'll be looking at this more closely in the next phase of the design process. But I did just want to put these up here so you can see what's coming.
Well, it seems like the most popular topic is energy savings. And right now, Medford's PV policy is a building that's greater than 10,000 square feet, requires PV array on the roof, size to 50% of that roof, usable roof, I should say, or 90% of the top level of a parking structure if it's uncovered, which I don't believe will affect Medford High School, but it's an option. Exceptions are unsuitable spaces or structures that can't have can't support the structure of the solar array, or if the roof is 50% shaded throughout the year. When it comes to stretch code, we have going through the all-electric pathway. You'll have to have 40% of the usable roof covered, which is under what Medford requires. And any buildings that are still using fossil fuels you'll still have to provide that solar PV array to offset those fossil fuels, such as for the pool heating, culinary kitchens, labs, and such. When it comes to battery storage, it's not necessarily a code requirement, but it does help with the LEED version 5. So it does add points to get you to higher than silver. And then everything else will just be contributes to the LEED 5 and get you to silver, higher gold for the aspirations. And then other options would be for walkway structures or parking structures for PV array locations. And if there is a patio on the roof, you can have a high canopy there, or awnings, vertical wall structures.
So just to quickly clarify, if you do an all-electric pathway in specialized school, the 40% is readiness. You don't specifically have to install it. Whereas if you have fossil fuel, you have to install to offset your fossil fuel. You have to install the amount of PV that offsets your fossil fuel use. We'll dive more in the code, the details of the code in the next meetings in terms of what does that mean for your project. We started looking at ballpark numbers, and so how much of that 50%, for example, of your roof area would be equivalent in terms of a net zero building, right? So we'll have more of those figures in the next phase of the feasibility study.
We had another slide here on EV chargers, but Andrew, I'm going to cut you off just because I get the sense that people would like to talk about some of this a little bit. And we're sort of running short on time. So I think I will pitch it over. I think there was a couple hands up earlier that we'll get to. I know we have some folks online, then we'll try to circle through.
Great, thank you. I have a comment, a question, and a comment. First, I have to leave at 6:30, so don't take me leaving as any sign of being unhappy with it. Question, how much of the overall budget historically has the MSBC contributed to projects of this scale and percentage? How much would we expect will be offset by their investment?
So you're saying overall with the project contribution, so it varies per community. The agreed upon reimbursement rate, and I forget what it is off the top of my head, is, let's just say it's 50% for right now. I think it's a little bit higher than that. It's a very confusing number though, because it doesn't actually equate to like what their contribution is at the end of the day, because 50% say of eligible costs, and there's a whole like 45-minute presentation. on
That's
what
helpful.
that is.
Just trying to get a sense for the scale for which, we might expect reimbursement versus have to fund ourselves. So my comment is, I want to register my support for doing LEED Silver and code minimum. A lot of these systems are very sophisticated between design and maintenance. And a lot of payback is, for lack of a better word, speculative. The data is based on unsimilar situations or not apples to apples to what we're doing, and is not able to accurately predict what is actually available for payback on some of this. So personally, I believe that we should stick with the simpler approach to tried and true technologies that doesn't so much count on future dollars coming in as it does what can we afford today and what can we afford to maintain today. And aspiring to gold or silver, I think, will distract us from that goal and lead us more toward new cutting edge technologies or technologies that are going to be difficult to maintain or to repair or replace in the future. So that's all I got. Thank you.
I had a couple of questions. One, is the rate, and maybe there's a question for the energy manager I can follow up later, does Medford High have a specific rate structure that would benefit from dispatching storage on like a regular basis? Like as you guys are going about your design and your load calculations, like are you looking at, okay, we're gonna assume this much PV during the day, but we're gonna offset that with the battery at select points, or we're only gonna use the battery for demand response credits with National Grid? Like I'm wondering if you could talk like how are you formulating that strategy?
Right. Again, that's gonna be a discussion. There is a rate and it's probably the commercial rate and.
But it's a standard. It's not like
It's a standard. They raise it every year. So when we do the cost analysis, we put cost escalation in there. We have precedents because we've been doing this for a long time, so we can share that. The use of the battery storage is going to be up to the management, the school, the facilities management.
So
I mean, they can take advantage of that demand response.
Yeah.
Those are specific times, especially during the summer. But they can also manage it so that they can hold the storage and then use it when it's peak. Let's say in the winter, they use it at night because that's when it's peak. So that's gonna be up to the facility management to optimize the use of that energy storage in general. And then on top of that, they can add the incentive programs and benefit further from it.
And are you assuming that the high school or the city will be the owner of the solar, or will you sign a third-party PPA with the solar?
That's an excellent comment.
Yeah.
Because if you are the owner, you own all the greenhouse gas reduction and you get all that revenue. If you rent your roof and your parking to a third party, they're gonna get all that money. You're gonna get only a reduction. Obviously there's a contract to be negotiated with them, but what we're seeing for most of them, it's a 20-year contract at a fixed rate. And so you may not get as much money back than if you own the system. But again, that will be a discussion as we look into these options. That will be a discussion for the community and for the community to decide, because owning the PV and the battery storage obviously adds a cost, and there's a payback to be looked at and all that.
So I know there's a couple of hands up here. I want to let Brenda respond, and I want to go back to Audrey because she did have her hand up in between, then we'll circle back. I know there's a lot of topics for discussion here going forward. We actually have a lot of other content as well, but we may just pause and spend a little bit more time here because I think it is productive conversation. So Brenda, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I was just going to add that there are demand charges for buildings that are this size, commercial buildings that are this size, and the high school is our largest energy user of any of our municipal owned buildings in the city. So the demand charges are quite expensive for it. So I think will be interesting to see the cost analysis of storage compared to the savings that we would get from the demand response we could do with the batteries.
Appreciate that. Audrey, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to go back to the HVAC, the HVAC stuff. So I just feel very compelled to speak up about this. I absolutely, no, the one before, yeah, so, speaking as someone who has been in that building over 25 years, I can say that this is a huge point of contention, if you will, because as you all know, the building is old, but the amount of years of not just me, but obviously every teacher that has had to deal with the uncomfortable conditions in that building is horrendous. Now, I am lucky because I'm in the science wing and that was redone about 11 years ago. However, what's upsetting is that the first few years, they let us have individual control over our rooms, and then that was taken away. And then now currently there's something weird and something wrong with the system, and they can't seem to control it. It's something weird about the central control. And I'll give you just a personal example. Like my room is set to over 75 right now, and I'm like dying in it. And like today was kind of like warmer, and I've had to crack my window, and it kills me because I know what a waste of energy. And Brenda just said that. I know what a waste of energy that is. But I just want to make sure that in this new space that whoever's going to be running it, whether it's buildings and grounds or whoever, is going to be able to run it. But I would ask and beg that you allow teachers as professionals to control their own rooms, because it's just, it doesn't feel very respectful, right? And then just to trust us that we would not be abusing the system, right? Of like cranking it down or cranking it up or whatever. So I just feel really strongly about that because of all the years of just having such miserable conditions. And then, I mean, that it's just, I just wanted to pipe up about that as a voice of an educator who's been in that building all these years.
Really appreciate that perspective. And I think that's definitely is going to be subject of a lot of conversations going forward, and certainly central to the design of the mechanical system as Emily gets into it. Luke, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I have 3 comments and then a question for the rest of you.
See what people are doing, they're just sort of collecting all the
You know, arrows.
Go ahead.
So a couple comments. In our SOI, which is available on the Medford High School website, there's a report that was put together in 2019. Earlier, we saw EUI target 25-35. The report contains the measured values over like maybe a 9-year period, showing what the EUI for the building is or was. You can see a spike sort of during the COVID years. I personally attribute that to more fans and more air circulation. Maybe it's something else, I don't know. But historically, the number was around 60. And then COVID happened and it spiked and it got a lot higher. The report also contains a breakdown between the contribution from electric sources and from natural gas. That's, you know, our fossil fuel. So I encourage everyone who's interested in this topic to read that report, get a good idea of what the current school requires in terms of energy. On the PPA discussion, I have panels on my roof. When I put them up, the best panels produced 218 watts per panel. Today, that's a lot better. If you were to do the same exercise today, you could get panels that produce 460 watts. And that makes a big difference when you multiply by many panels. So a PPA versus a purchase system, requires cost benefit analysis, and I certainly would ask for one before making the buy versus rent decision, because I see our electric needs growing as time goes on and more people buy electric cars. There's not actually that many out there. Maybe we see a higher concentration because of where we live and work. But if you travel outside of the 95 bubble, there's not many electric cars. However, in the future, that's going to change. Our needs are going to grow. And, you know, having a PPA positions you to upgrade. You sacrifice in one area and you have growth in another. I'm not advocating for one or the other, but I would expect a detailed cost benefit analysis for the make versus rent decision. I think you owe it to the school, the children, and taxpayers. Let's see, on the reimbursability topic, it varies widely. And it's, as Matt alluded to, a function of what's reimbursable. So take Revere. Revere is building an enormous school. It's going to cost over $700 billion, according to the Boston. Million. Did I say billion?
You did say billion.
Every year, yes, that's one. So $750 million, according to Boston. Now they have a very high reimbursement rate, a rate that we couldn't even dream of, but it's around 80%, might be 83%. However, that only applies to reimbursable costs. And so the amount that they're getting reimbursed is not 83% of $700 million. It is 83% of the smaller sum. And altogether, it's probably close to $300 million reimbursed on a $700 million school. So it really matters about, you know, what's reimbursable, what's not, and then the percentage. And currently our percentage is at 53% for this study, and that will change based on what this project begins to look like and what's reimbursable, what's not, where we score points, where we don't.
Percentage won't change, the reimbursement
I think the percentage can change.
not necessarily.
It doesn't have to, but I have a lot of examples.
We're talking like.
I'm just saying it fluctuates and it's not constant from community to community, and I have a lot of reimbursement forms that the MSBA publishes. So anyway, it's going to change a lot. It's not set right now. And it's something that we should all pay attention to. Now to the SMMA team, my question. We saw 57 concepts yesterday. And I know that, you know, we had some sort of initial, I'll say, just impression gathering. But certainly some of the shapes that we saw and some of, I'll say, the aspect ratios, you know, imply to me that there are concepts that are not well suited for things like PV deployment or potentially other technologies, whereas others are going to have better just inherent attributes. And I wanted to ask if all 57 are going to be sort of assessed for the kind of technologies that we're looking at, or will we delay that assessment until we narrow it down? Could you walk us through kind of where this subcommittee merges with, I'll say, the main line to have its impact?
Yeah, so first, we're at 29 versus 57, which to me, if it makes me feel a little bit better, 29 is still a big number, right? What we're going to be doing as we go forward, we're definitely going to add, I think, solar suitability or whatever the terminology that into the overall valuation criteria that the building committee and consequently, I think this advisory team as well, does sort of a lens to look at the different options as we move forward. In terms of how the overlap of this advisory team's review and the SBC's review works, I think we'll have to think through that timeline of exactly sort of what is being reviewed at particular points as we go forward. But we're not going to be reducing probably from that 29 until we're getting into the PSR phase, the next phase of the feasibility study. So we will be getting together again here before we make that reduction down. So there will be the opportunity for this group to actually input on some of those topics, whatever those evaluation criteria are. The evaluation criteria should be set before we get to the PSR phase as we really jump into it. And so I think we can also work to help craft and sort of evaluate whether or not we have all the correct evaluation criteria in that longer list. And again, it's not just solar suitability. It's gonna range everything from educational priorities to site amenities to community goals to, we're gonna come up with what that list is, but there definitely will be overlapping opportunities as we move forward before that 29 group is culled to something smaller. And just so people are aware, we're not gonna jump from 29 to 1, most likely in terms of the process. There's gonna be sort of a short listing of it, and then we'll try to make a final selection in terms of just what people can expect as part of the process. Right. So I want to push us forward to embodied carbon, and I'm going to sort of just tell our team, warn our team that we'll probably have to take a much more abbreviated view of each of these because we have about 30 minutes left. And some of these are going to be shorter topics, but I know it's definitely challenging to ask everyone to do, but just to try to sort of expedite or maybe hit the high points, because I'm sure that people here have thoughts and topics that they want to talk through.
So to be very brief, LEED is going to include a lot of sustainable materials, you know, looking at waste, and there's also a requirement for embodied carbon. So there's a minimum there. What we want to look into and what we're going to continue to look into is to go beyond that minimum as much as it's you know, feasible. Next. So, you know, when we look at materials, exterior materials, we start looking at embodied carbon impact, and a lot of the embodied carbon, next, push again, yeah. A lot of the embodied carbon resides in the building enclosure and structures. There's a focus there, but that's not to say that we're not gonna look at other material. For example, ceiling tiles and gypsum is pretty high carbon as well, so we look into that. Next. So low carbon concrete, structural steel with high recycled content, low carbon material insulation, gypsum ceilings, and others. And the one other thing that's going to be discussed is, you know, the consideration that's, we're curious to understand from you, if you're interested in considering mass timber and wood structural component, whether it's a full structure or a hybrid approach, which is something we can look into. But mass timber obviously has an impact on reducing embodied carbon. That's it.
We can pause there for a second.
We can pause and get your input from there.
And just to add a little bit of sort of more specific commentary on the building. So we have had some initial discussions with our structural engineer. Understanding that we have about a 15-foot by 15-foot structural grid at work in this building where we have the concrete frame portions of the building. That structural grid dimension actually works pretty well with a mass timber structure. If we're thinking about expanding horizontally, or even if we're thinking about expanding vertically on this existing concrete structure, and not all the building is concrete structure, there are portions that are steel framed, like the vocational wing, like the gym, like the pool. So it's already a little bit of a hybrid structural system that we have. But there is some inherent sort of compatibility between the timber frame and then the concrete frame as it exists today, just for what that's worth.
So part of the discussion will be around, you know, wood structure will be to look at, you know, the appetite for the full new components or hybrid option. And we're, you know, curious to know what sort of where this group falls in terms of interest for that.
I mean, I guess I would expect, this is a little bit repeating sort of the broader theme, but sort of viewing that in the broader context of the schedule and the budget, right? And if timber framing, I don't know sort of one versus the other, but if that's going to add cost, you know, where would you recommend that we you know, sacrifice that cost from, say, somewhere else, based on, you know, prior experience. I think seeing, you know, everything's going to have a trade-off, right, as you're working through it. So
Yeah, and I think this group is also about sort of establishing some of those priorities and talking about sort of where, from a larger community perspective, because we have a lot of really great voices as part of this group, just to understand, and it may be different for different perspectives and roles or responsibilities within the city as well.
I mean, I think we should definitely look at a hybrid system. I would imagine we won't end up with a full mass timber system just for various reasons, but we're in the woods, not just for the carbon footprint, but for the, we don't aesthetics of it. It seems like something should be definitely studied. We'll see how it comes out in terms of the budget.
Using mass timber also allows for less use of other materials, like you can have exposed ceilings and things.
Yeah.
So there's the trade-off there.
Definitely.
And exposed wood has been shown to, you know, ties to biophilia. This is
Yeah.
a human healthfulness connection to it too.
Can I just ask, so I don't know very much about it, but, in terms of typical, facility volumes that utilize mass timber, is there any limit on the size of the structure? Or is there kind of like a do not exceed size for dealing with wood? And I'm thinking about, you know, it's got inferior mechanical properties relative to metal. And so like spans or something, you gotta think about stiffness and all that. So I wonder, are there like some limitations on how big? Because from yesterday, I have an understanding that this is gonna be a very large structure. And so, if you could provide some commentary on applicability of, timber on a very, very large structure, that's probably larger than what we have today.
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to think about it. One is sort of what I was alluding to previously in terms of the structural grid dimensions that exist and sort of what timber can do in terms of traditional spans without getting too deep, right? Because if we're thinking about a renovation of this existing building with a 12-foot 10 floor to floor height, dropping significant depths in terms of any type of structural frame is going to limit our ceiling heights and impact our indoor environment in terms of probably in a detrimental way in terms of making it feel very compressed. But from like how big can we go with the mass timber from an overall building standpoint? I think that's really driven more by building code. It's going to be like the limitation that gets put on that. And that's true for any type of structural system gets classified into a particular construction type. And we're allowed overall height limitations and horizontal distance limitations. It's not to say that we can't separate the building using firewalls and other things to sort of extend the realistic extent of how far we can go with it. It's really just being able to work through the constraints of the building code more than anything in terms of understanding how much we can use.
And is there like an additional burden for fire prevention and sprinklers and things like that relative to a concrete metal structure, or is it equivalent?
So there definitely is a connection in terms of the relative fire resistance of any structural system and how far we can go before we have to separate the building or how high we can go before we separate the building. The way that mass timber works is that it chars the structural or the building code assumes that it chars on the outside before it completely fails in terms of a structure, right? And so it's accounting for when they gives us the area limitations and the height limitations, like the time involved in terms of fire tests and what it's been proven to. Sprinkler systems will increase those limitations in terms of what we can build to. Again, whether it's concrete or whether it's steel or whether it's wood of any type. So all those things work together in terms of driving sort of what each structural system might allow us to do. But definitely is connected into things like fire protection systems and fireproofing of the actual structural members themselves as well. Whether that's like applying something to them, whether it's into messing coating or spray fireproofing, or sort of wrapping the members with another type of material that's fire resistant, like a drywall or a gypsum board. So there's a lot of sort of complex interrelationships from a building code perspective in terms of dictating what those restrictions are. So
this school was built because the prior school burned down. Down the street from me.
Concrete is from a fire resistance standpoint, is a wonderful material. It will not burn, right? And you can build as far as you want to and as high as you want to, really without limitations is what the code tells us. And that sort of how that equates to its fire resistance. So yes, and that's most certainly one of the reasons why this was built on concrete primarily, but we do have some steel, right, in terms of those longer span spaces. All right. The last comment, and I'll move on. Okay. We can always come back to it too. All right, helpfulness.
So, let's try to go quick. So, last meeting, there was obviously comments around daylight, obviously, maybe challenging or limited in this current structure. The new design will definitely optimize and access to views and daylight to the majority of the, classrooms, program space to, the extent possible. Whether it's side or, in some places we'll have top light, and then, air quality was another, so, there's gonna be more talk about this, ventilation, obviously ventilation quality. Just quickly, LEED has a set of criteria that brings, high environmental and high indoor air quality. So all of those will be part of the project. And then occupant experience in terms of interior lighting, acoustical, thermal comfort, all of those are also inherent in LEED, but that's not to say that there's going to be a set of discussion in criteria beyond LEED that's going to be brought up as part of the design of the project. Operable windows, for example, passive survivability that was mentioned earlier on. There's potential to look into mixed mode in terms of using outdoor air when possible, and natural ventilation when possible, etc. And then the construction indoor air quality practice. So there's a whole set of LEED that looks at the construction practices and sort of requires a set of practices that is going to sort of help indoor air quality. So cleaning and flush out is big. Flush out is big. And then there's testing as well. And then healthfulness beyond LEED. LEED requires red list materials. There's a minimum. We're currently applying red list material to a very high level in other projects, and so we're looking forward to share that expertise and those opportunities. And that doesn't mean the fellow about the cost is gone, but it doesn't mean it's going to cost more. It's about vetting the right materials. Biophilia, we talked about flush out, and then there's a whole component of healthfulness that's tied into the site. And so the site discussions are going to address this. We're not going to go in detail about this today, but they're very much into looking at the major opportunities offered with the proximity of the bells and sort of the landscape around. And then environmental literacy, we talked about outdoor classrooms a bit. That was brought up as well. Green vegetated roofs was something that was brought up that we'll talk about. And then we usually do a quite extensive set of signage, which sort of combines all of the sustainability criteria throughout the school and combines it with sort of a set of imagery and language that can support the educational program. In this project, you also have the great opportunity of your vocational program, which can be tied even more closely to sustainable design, whether it's certain things that they will do within their program or whether it's interacting with some of the building components. For example, the culinary can include a portion of the kitchen that's all electric because that's where commercial kitchens are going. The automotive can look into electric cars right? And things can be set up for it. So those discussions are gonna come through as we progress through the design.
Yeah, just with those two items actually in particular, so the culinary arts folks are completely happy with doing fully electric kitchen already, so that will not be sort of a hill that we have to climb. And certainly the automotive technology folks are asking us to plan for electric vehicle stations, so they're very much on board here, I think, from a CTE perspective in terms of where we're thinking of.
I thought they just got a grant or started a program to bring some equipment in to start being able to service electric cars.
They have, there's a little bit of a spatial
Yeah.
backup right now in terms of how many bays that they have to work with and what they can do, but definitely as we're planning, we're thinking of specific bays for EVs. as we go
The
forward.
kitchen is a big deal because it ties into the code and the fossil. So if we can eliminate the gas cooking in the teaching kitchen and in the main kitchen, then we're eliminating that PV requirement, that electrification requirement. So that's great.
Yeah, and actually the main kitchen as well, all
Yeah.
electric is gonna be perfectly
That's
fine.
awesome. That's
So Sonny, you had your hand up, and I'm also gonna just note that, we're happy to have Sonny here because of HMFH's work that they've done with, red list materials, through the MSBA. There's a wealth of knowledge that we're definitely gonna tap into you for, so.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I read those materials are things that we can do on any project without additional cost. There are a few particular components within buildings that do cost a little bit more, but it's in a I'm curious, and maybe it's because of my knowledge about this, if there's confusion around all electric gas, because the option specialized code doesn't require you to be all electric. You do have hybrid options, right? However,
But
lead
you have
me
to
five
tell
does, right? There's an electrification requirement for lead me five.
It's a credit.
It's not a prereq.
It's not a
Okay,
prereq.
so that was my confusion.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. And he's gone. I don't remember everyone's names, but just to his point, I do want to acknowledge that that is a system option, and that if we don't study it, I'm not certain we're showing people we've done our due diligence. I think it's important for all Medford residents to understand that you have studied it and it doesn't cost out. I know it won't, but sometimes it does, and I think that's important for people to look at. I know that if you use gas, you have to put it on the roof. We should be putting it on the roof anyway, because that's what Medford requires, and just because we're a school doesn't mean you shouldn't comply with that. But I think that's important to acknowledge, and bringing all community members along. I think we have a pretty varied population here in Medford, and I think it's important that when we go to vote for this, we show that we've done that due diligence.
So what you're suggesting is that on top of the all electric options, we look at a natural gas option, which we have done in other projects, and we can certainly.
Yeah, I do. I don't prefer that, and I think we should go ground source heat pumps all the way. It's gonna be the most efficient. It will have the better payback if it's viable. That's my personal viewpoint on that. I think that's the way to go. I think we should figure that out, whether or not there's an additional system, because ground source isn't always the most efficient for all of the things that you're doing inside these buildings.
So the one thing I want to say is when we look at that, because of the specialized code, the cost of the natural gas is gonna have to include the solar photovoltaic.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you.
Whereas the all electric one, so it's gonna have to be a real comparison, so everybody understand what's implied. Into choosing the fossil fuel versus the all electric.
That's part of the story.
It is,
Right.
and sometimes the added cost of solar sort of brings that up in cost, so that it looks like a better, not maybe better comparison, but it's more similar comparison to ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps. I'm glad to see we're not studying VRF. I'm not a fan of that, and I think it's great for a school not to consider that at all. I know that's, I don't know if mass save incentives are changing at all, but it'd be really good to understand where the heat pump adders are in terms of our reimbursement separate from MSBA.
So when we get into the LCCA, I can explain that. It's too bad he had to leave, but hopefully you'll watch the record of it, because we're gonna talk about this, because absolutely, the incentives are something we need to make sure that we pursue upfront, and we'll probably be connecting with them towards the end of feasibility or right at the beginning of SDF, there needs to be a connection soon.
That's right, I don't want to monopolize this, but I do also think there've been a couple of comments about fees or passive house.
What?
Passive house, sorry, passive house certification. There was an excellent webinar on that through BE Plus the other day, which is architects jargon for extra learning credits, and so anyway, and I think we should talk about this here as like a serious topic, because I think there are a lot of soft costs added to that will make it, that are pretty significant, that I'm not sure people really understand, although like in terms of energy modeling, you were the expert on the team, but I know that versus Teddy can be tricky in trying to convey what that means to everyone.
Yeah, this school is over 0.5 CFM per square foot, so we can curb around Teddy.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
But we absolutely can, because we've done that, we have an idea of some of the cost of passive house, so we can bring that in as, you know, an item, because it was brought up, and so we took note, and we can certainly.
But to your point about the 59, 57 options,
29, just 29.
Fine, okay.
Yeah.
I just went to 42, so like.
Like ones to cost.
Oh, that's what it was, okay, yeah, because some of them were grayed out.
Anyway.
Similar.
Initially, it was a big grid though.
Well,
Still 57.
I think that's important, like you've done a lot of research to narrow that down already, I think that's great. But if we're going passive house, they require you to analyze the envelope, right? And to your point about understanding whether or not one building is better than the other, like envelope area is a big one, right? And we know the passive house looks at that, so I know we haven't narrowed down the criteria for what, like how we're gonna add these like MEP sustainability things to help narrow that down. But I think like trying to figure out where this is going for those particular goals, because I think there's a huge difference between a goal and a strategy, right? We're here to set goals, you're here to give us strategies. And so we want to be able to be effective in setting those goals, and so trying to understand like what that means here, I think is really important.
Yep. Thank you. No, I do think that's great, and that's great to hear your feedback on that, because we will take that, we'll take that back, and I think your comment about passive house is well taken.
Yeah, and then I think there's another level to it as well in terms of the soft costs are associated, right? There's one thing to design the passive house with passive house strategies, right? So that we minimize loss through the envelope, and we sort of try to minimize the amount of ventilation that we're gonna be having to expend energy on versus actually going for a certification and paying sort of for the third party oversight and registration, those types of things. So we probably need to make that decision as well, or recommendation for that decision as we go forward. But we can start to get a little bit of a sense of what the soft costs are as well, on top of like the capital costs that would actually go into the building.
Well, I think that raises a good broader point that was mentioned earlier as well, that, you know, the sign on the building is nice, it's something that the community can sort of hold up. But at the end of the day, you know, that might be nice for the ribbon cutting, but at the end of the day, like, the utility costs are gonna be what they are. And some of these other, as we're thinking about what's the payback on the structure, well, if there's been a lot of money spent to get that certification, just for the sake of getting the certification, it doesn't, I don't know.
Like the design better.
It's not like, exactly, that's
Money
right.
to have.
Yeah, that's right, like design it to like what the certification says and commission it, but then if we don't go forward with the certification, like the students are still getting the positive value and the educators are still getting the positive value.
From the efficiency that.
Yeah, that's right.
And the taxpayers.
And us as presidents, right?
We're gonna need easy to understand cost benefit analyses for a lot of decisions. Because one thing that we can't escape is the square footage of what's proposed is enormous, and that's a direct proxy for cost. And regardless of what we do, it's gonna be a big number. And so now we want to start adding things in, they have to be justified. Because they're not gonna be aggregated to a big number, they're gonna be piling onto an already big project.
Correct.
But I think it's also looking at the life cycle costs, because it's also projecting into the future, because it's not just what we're building today. I mean, we can put all these elements in, and it's not what is, yeah, the certifications are nice, but it's what do we put in today when we have costs that are being partially paid for today, and we're getting help being paid for, but we're not gonna have help with the operating costs down the line. And I think that's critical to think about too, is how do we operate this building in the future, and what's gonna pay for it in the future to operate?
Are there things beyond need, like, with water that we can look at? And we didn't really talk anything about water consumption. We have a pool.
So yes, these things, we're gonna dive more into.
It's a pun right there.
We're
Yeah.
No, but into
I think there's free swim in the mornings.
But all these different areas of sustainable design, coming from your comments and also from LEED, are gonna be in future meetings, are gonna be looked into in more detail. We just browse through it now because we don't have the time, just like we're browsing.
So we are, and I'm cognizant of the fact that we have 5 minutes left. I see that Jenny has her hand up, so I want to give you just a couple minutes, Jenny. And then I just want to wrap us up at the end. Again, I think we actually have touched on a lot of what we've gone through
Right.
with the slides, so
Can I
hopefully
just,
people don't feel like they're missing out.
just for everyone, for the person that had to go. So the life cycle cost analysis, this 50-year life cycle cost analysis, it's done, required by MSBA. And it's not just comparing the systems, it's comparing the whole building, enclosure, electrical and mechanical. And it's looking at first cost, which is, what you're referring to, installation cost, which is first cost, replacement cost throughout those 15 years. So it touches on some operating costs and maintenance costs on top of energy costs. All of those are combined over 50 years. We put in cost escalation. We also look at upfront incremental costs, comparing the systems, including the fossil fuel. And we also add on to those potential incentives. I'll leave it to that. We can talk a bit more at the next meeting, but it's pretty comprehensive, and I think it will help the conversation, support the conversation about systems.
Okay, Jenny, go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. I just wanted to maybe flag a couple things and thank everyone for their thoughts. There's been some like really interesting things discussed, and I'm not an expert in this area, so I definitely am learning a lot. The two things I wanted to flag is that when the school committee commissioned the building committee, they did set forth a goal of LEED V5. So that's not to say the school committee would be completely unwilling to understand what the impact of that was. But that original charge did provide some language about our collective sustainability goals, and that being sort of push towards the gold standard was important. So I do think we need to continue to consider that as an option so that we can make informed decisions. I am a huge fan of not saying no to things at this early stage because we don't know enough to say no. We don't want things. And I just want to sort of flag that I'm super supportive of like looking at all the options, whether they're ones I particularly like or don't like. And then I think the other thing, Matt, that maybe we can talk about offline is to provide this group and the public in general with some transparency on what it costs in the current environment to heat and electrify this building. It is like, the numbers are just shocking. Like I intuitively know that they're high and they surprise me every time that I hear about them. So I don't think the sort of general public has any sense of what those numbers are. And they're not particularly easy to find, but I think we can do a better job of helping people understand this current building and what it costs us. Because I think that's hugely important. And I think the other thing that was sort of on my mind as I was listening to the conversation is how helpful this group will be when we are thinking about criteria by which to make narrowing down kinds of decisions so that we aren't throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, but instead sort of thinking about the expertise in this room and the people who do this work for a living, helping guide us. So I appreciate everyone who's been here. And Matt, we can talk about some of those other things at some point in time and maybe bring those things back to this group.
Sounds great. Okay, and so to wrap up in a minute, or probably a little less than a minute, again, we're going to be meeting in March 11th is the next date for this advisory team to get together. It's going to be at 4 p.m. We'll most likely be in this room. I think we're still going to keep the hybrid format because this has worked pretty well. In terms of the activity that we're going to be doing, again, you may have all heard this as you came in towards the end of the last meeting, but for record purposes and those online, we will be coming up with a series of line item recommendations and like an Excel document. We're going to be using a traffic signal analogy. We're going to be treating some of these things as given recommendations, things that there's no question or discussion that everyone's in agreement that we'll make a recommendation back to the building committee on. There will be some yellow flashing light items that are going to warrant discussion that we'll use the time to actually work our way through. And then there may also be some red light options that are just things that are not going to be recommended to be included in the project moving forward. So again, these recommendations, this group is not making decisions on those items. We're going to be forwarding recommendations back to the building committee as a group, and it'll be sort of in a line item type of format with these sort of colors associated with them. Luke has one final question, and we're still under past not 7 o'clock yet, but it may go there.
All right, hopefully it's a productive question. So, let's see, we've got a couple of months until March. There are a lot of things that we have not talked about. I appreciate the overview and introduction to a lot of different concepts, some technologies, but there are a lot of things that I've seen at other schools that I think are really good in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of a lot of like secondary benefits, well, specific technologies that haven't been brought up. And I understand that we're tight on time. We have an hour and a half, and there's a lot to get through. And we always ask questions, and so we slow things down. There's only so much you can cram into the hour and a half. But prior to this meeting, where we're going to be stoplighting or traffic coloring, different ideas, preferences, I was wondering, should we expect any read-aheads, or should we expect any solicitations where we can suggest some technologies to consider as part of the stoplighting activity? The one that I'll just make a plug for that I really like, if we have a tall vertical structure, and we have a lot of different shapes to work through, and it may not be tall and vertical, but if it is tall and vertical, are there ways to like harness just the natural wind? We're already pretty high up. We're probably like 100 feet up. So, there's some of that to kind of tap into for, energy savings. And like light wells that Arlington do really, really well. That bring, oh, is that you guys?
Wow, that's like a setup for you said.
I walked through there when they had the, open house in the community, and thought that the effect was really great. And it varies as you go, like, through the elevation. But it was like really great in the library. But it was also really effective at bringing daylight into like a large volume that if it were closed, you'd be spending money to illuminate it, right? So schools held during the day, it's not cloudy, there's a lot of sunshine. We happen to be pretty high up, and there's really not a lot of tree obscuration. So, I want to make a plug for light wells.
So I think with those types of things, so yes, we'll find a mechanism probably through the full building committee that people can bring up ideas.
Okay.
We have that connection to the committee as well. So maybe we can work with you, Luke, just as sort of being a conduit to sort of bring some of those ideas in and include them in the list for consideration.
Okay.
Can I just ask you a question about that, just for everyone to think of, like, those are really great strategies for achieving a goal, right? those light wells, the goal was daylight autonomy. So maybe that's something that we discuss here as a goal. So that they can start to consider things like light wells or the wind, like the purpose of that is zero energy. I like,
Time's your enemy though, because in June, we have to have like a.
but you have to have goals before you can develop strategies. So I think like, we don't want to put the cart before the horse in this sense, right? So I think those are excellent strategies and I do think we should keep them as means for us like achieving goals. But understanding what the actual goal is, I think is our task. And then you get to decide what the strategies are on that.
I don't think our agenda, like meeting agendas, just being devil's advocate, I'm not being argumentative, but from what I've seen, you know, with our prepared agendas, we're not on a path to develop goals. In time for when a preferred design needs to be sort of presented to the NSPA. We would have to potentially change approach.
I mean, the recommended approach, design approach is going to be at schematic design when that final package goes in, which is not till early 2027.
I think we have.
Okay, yeah, I thought we had like a June, July deadline.
That's a preferred schematic report, but it's gonna be at still a higher level where we do want to identify.
Oh, all right, so we actually have
all the
lots more clock.
Yes, correct.
There's more plot for this level, like there will be top lighting. Because, you know, our schools have top lighting, it's, you know, but, you know, to Suni's point, you know, is there a specific goal for it? You know, that's something that we, you know, we want to hear.
Okay, yeah, I take back, I thought we had a much shorter response.
What you're seeing in those 29 options is high level massing. A lot of the design is not in there yet, right? But that's not to say that all of those items that you feel near and dear for, they need to be brought up now. They can be, you know, integrated, I think, towards the end of feasibility into schematic design, but it's best to bring some of those now, honestly.
I'm gonna cut us off because we are 5 minutes over and we certainly appreciate anyone that has hung out with us, but I do want to respect people's times. Thank you. This was a wonderful discussion and I really do appreciate like the level of understanding and feedback that we've been able to get from this group. That's just really invaluable in terms of the process. So thank you.